public with their calls. So this is, at the root of all of this, is a concern that Biden had become so damaged following that debate some 3 weeks ago that he was going to lose to Donald Trump, which for Democrats is an extraordinary, would be an extraordinary failure. But more than that, that Republicans would win up and down the ballot. So you would have Donald Trump winning and potentially Republicans winning back the Senate and expanding their majority in the House. That's why you saw so much pressure. But the pressure was extraordinary. It was the Democratic leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries. It was the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and it was perhaps the conscience of the party, maybe the most influential member of Congress who's not in leadership, Nancy Pelosi, all making the case privately directly to Biden that this was the only viable decision for him to make.
Jonathan, Karl, stay with us as we continue to following these breaking news developments. I want to go right now to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, who is joining us on the phone. Mary, 40 Democrats as of today were calling on the president to step aside. You have made this point over and over again. This was the president's decision alone to make, Mary.
It absolutely was. And look, he was under tremendous pressure, and it is clear that that pressure ultimately was just too much for him to bear. We have seen over the last 3 weeks since that disastrous debate performance a really remarkable evolution in this public really, hemming and hawing over whether or not he could stay in this race. The president initially adamant that this was just a one-off, just a bad night, that debate, and that he could convince the American people that he could still do this, that he was still up to the task of taking on Donald Trump and governing for another 4 years. He went out on the campaign trail hard. As you know, he was out there crisscrossing the country, doing those unscripted events that so many of his doubters were demanding. He did interviews. He did that big press conference. He did huge rallies trying to show his own party that he could still handle this. But it simply wasn't enough, and the pressure just continued to grow. It started off as that sort of trickle that became a steady stream as we saw more and more House members coming out. Then we, as you well know, we saw, the first senator coming out. Now we have several senators coming out, that number growing, but ultimately it was leadership, I think, that really likely tipped the scale here. The fact that you had Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the House and the Senate, coming to him and explaining that if he stayed at the top of this ticket, he was going to drag down Democrats. And then, of course, Nancy Pelosi, the powerful former Speaker of the House, someone who does not do anything without great intention and purpose, making that argument as well. The president, we know, I keep thinking about this, Rachel, he has been spending this weekend sick with COVID, trying to recover at home, but we also know that he has been taking that time to listen, to hear out these concerns, to look over the polling. This is a president who even, on the daily decisions that he has to make as president, wants all the information. We know this. He is a man who thinks through everything carefully. I can only imagine what this process has been like. He said that he would only drop out if he saw the polling showed that there was no way that he could be successful in this race. And clearly he has come to that recognition. He also initially, sort of brushed off the fact that the leadership would ultimately come to him and say, this isn't going to work. And of course, we have, seen that is what happened. It is near impossible to run for president if you do not have your party united behind you. And this was likely a very, very difficult decision for Joe Biden. He has been in public service for more than 50 years, spent many decades trying to reach the White House. When he launched his second campaign, he argued it was because he had to finish the job. Even though when he first ran, he ran as a transitional candidate. He said he would be a bridge to the next generation. Then when he came out and announced he was running for a second term, it was because he felt he simply wasn't done yet. He needed more time to finish the job. That was the campaign slogan. Clearly now he has decided what he cannot beat is what none of us can beat, which is the inevitable march of time. And he is now going to be passing the torch to that next generation, Rachel.
And Mary, let me just ask you a follow-up here, because after that debate, the president was adamant that he was going to stay in the race. He was telling lawmakers, give me a week. Let me prove you wrong. Let me do some of these off-scripted events. Let me do a sit-down interview, including with our own George Stephanopoulos. And then it sort of turned into this listening tour where the president was sitting down. He was hearing from Democrats. For the American people that are watching this right now, they're going to be wondering what exactly tipped the scales for President Biden. Do we have any sense yet of how the president ultimately reached this decision?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, we don't have that full insight just yet into what exactly it was that tipped the scale, but we do know that he was asking for the polling. He was asking for the data. And I think when you look at the numbers, and especially when you have the leaders of the party coming to you and saying, if you stay at the top, it's going to hurt Democrats in the House and the Senate, that's a lot to overcome. Also, when it is clear that you have so many in your own party who are urging you to back out, that is very hard to put back in the box. And once voters know that so many in your party don't think this is the right move, don't think this is the right decision, it's really hard to get people united again behind you. You simply cannot do that. And, part of this is sort of, something that's bigger than numbers, something that is bigger than all the data and the polling. And that is the question about Joe Biden's legacy, which also is something that we heard from so many of those who are urging Joe Biden to drop out. He is beloved in this party. And I think so many, when we look at all of those statements, urging him to step aside and out of this race, they mentioned that. That was a steady sort of, through line through all of this, which is that they were grateful for the work that the president had done. They wanted his legacy to be intact. They wanted him, to go out with the same common cause and common purpose, which was that they want to beat Donald Trump. And they feel, though, that the best way to do that is for Joe Biden to exit the race, something that he clearly now agrees with.
Yeah, we heard those calls even from Congressman Jamie Raskin, who was saying it's time for the pitcher to get off the mound, to hear the applause from the crowd in the stands. Mary Bruce, thank you. We're going to come back to you. I want to turn now to our political director and Washington Bureau Chief, Rick Klein. Rick, we hear Mary talking so much about the polling and about the president's team really showing him polling on whether or not he can win in this race. How much of that influence his decision, and what more have we learned about some of the polling that has come out just in the last few hours?
The polling just in the last few hours has been devastating for President Biden, not so much in the horse race, the head-to-head, because it's going to be a close election in a closely divided country. But the battleground state polling has been particularly bad. There's been new polling out of the state of Michigan in particular that's made the rounds. And beyond that, our new ABC Ipsos poll out just today had Donald Trump's approval rating up 9 points from a month ago and its highest rating in 4 years. It appears that he got a significant bounce out of his convention and after the assassination attempt last weekend. And that's part of the hill that Biden would have had to climb while he's losing the support of party leaders. While the polls are flipped against him, he would have had to turn all of that around and more. That appears to have played a major piece of the equation into making that final decision for him as he recovered from COVID and as he coped with the massive defections inside his own party.
Rick, stay with us here. I want to go now to Selena Wang, who's in Rehoboth, Delaware, with the president. She's traveling with the president. Selena, this is coming, as Rick just mentioned, as the president's recovering from COVID-19. What more are you learning?
Yeah, this is an extraordinary turn of events. The president has been holed up here in Rehoboth, Delaware, isolating with time to reflect as he's been recovering from COVID, and his doctor saying today that his symptoms have improved significantly. But Rachel, I cannot underscore this turn of events. As late as last night, I was talking to my sources, these Biden aides who are close to the president, saying that the president was still angry and upset, that he felt betrayed by some of his closest allies who had turned against him, and that he was still digging his heels in. Now today on Sunday, as the president is still isolating, we're learning that he's withdrawing from the race, and a senior administration official telling us that the president's senior campaign team and senior White House team did not learn of this news until shortly before the president decided to make this public. Now, Rachel, as we've been discussing, this pressure has just been building and mounting on the president. Of course, it's not just the crumbling support from top Democratic leadership, but it's also the money. Money was drying up. I was speaking to donors just this morning who said there is no path forward. Donors are just not putting their money in, and you cannot have a campaign without the money.
Selena, thank you. I want to go right back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. And Mary, we are following these rapidly moving developments. First, we had the letter from the president of the United States saying that he was going to step aside in this race. Now we are seeing yet another post on social media from President Biden, because the big question after the president announced that he was going to step aside in this race was who exactly was going to step in. Mary Bruce, it seems like the president has an answer to that question on who he's endorsing here.
Rachel, the president, in a tweet just announcing that he is offering his full support and endorsement for Kamala Harris to be the nominee of the party. I want to read this full message from him. He says, "My fellow Democrats, I've decided not to accept the nomination, to focus all my energies on my duties as president for the remainder of my term." He says, "My very first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president, and it's been the best decision I've made." He says, "Today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, he says, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this. The president has always made clear, Rachel, that he believes that Kamala Harris has what it takes to be president. He wouldn't have chosen her to be vice president if he didn't. But we have seen sort of an interesting change in the way he's talked about Kamala Harris, even in the last 2 weeks. It was just 5 days ago, I think, he was out in Las Vegas doing a big event before the NAACP, and he took on Trump, especially in the way that Trump has been reaching out to black voters. And he took on the way that Trump had once used the phrase, black jobs. And the president made this quip, this joke, not joke. He was fired back at Trump saying, I know what a black job is. It is vice president. And he said, point blank, Kamala Harris could be president. And he said it in a way that made all of our ears go up and made everyone listen closely, because it is clear that he likely was thinking about what would happen if we got to this point where he had finally decided, Joe Biden decided, that he needed to step aside and step out of this race. And now he is throwing his full weight and support behind Kamala Harris. It sends a huge message, especially to this party, about where we are going now, especially with such little time left in this race.
Yes, and Mary, it's not just what the president has been saying, it's also what Vice President Kamala Harris has been doing. We saw her in the days after that event really start to concentrate on rallying black voters. We know they are the bedrock of the Democratic base. What have you seen in the days following that debate, as well as the vice president really trying to concentrate in on the core of the Democratic base?
Rachel, she has been out there working the trail hard. She has been crisscrossing this country, and she has been, especially as you noted, really trying to rally those key constituencies where so much of this election is going to come down to. The Biden-Harris ticket has been very well aware that, especially among black voters, especially young black men, they are seeing signs in the polls that support is slipping. She has been out there, trying to get their message across to the voters who will really decide this race in November. But this entire time, Rachel, she has been a very loyal soldier. She has been adamant that they were still in this to win it. She has shown zero daylight between her and the president, as the president has been, clearly taking all of this in and trying to make this decision. Vice President Harris now catapulted to the top of the ticket. It is a remarkable, historic turn of events in the political history of this country.
Historic turn of events coming just about 100 days before the November election. If you're just joining us right now, President Biden has announced that he is stepping aside as the Democratic nominee with just over 100 days to go until the election. The president also just a short time ago endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris. I want to bring in now former North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Senator Heitkamp, I want to ask you this question because the president's stepping aside. We saw this growing amount of Democrats coming out and calling on him to make this decision. Now we have the president endorsing his own vice president, Kamala Harris, in this race. The big question now, are Democrats going to rally behind her?
I think Democrats are going to rally behind the president if he decided to stay in this race because the stakes are so high. Democrats are going to rally around whoever is the nominee. Remains to be seen what the DNC does. Obviously, the DNC in any incumbent president situation is controlled by the president, and so we'll have to see what the decision will be on terms of how they finish or how they replace the president at the top of the ticket. But clearly, naming Kamala Harris with his endorsement is a huge boost for her, even if it would be contested. I think she would make it through a contested convention. These are Biden delegates who are going to listen to Biden. And so, as I've said, I think that an open process is the best process for the Democratic Party. But it's not up to me to make that decision. And I think even if you had that, if you had a competition coming out of that competition, not a coronation would be really good for the vice president as she carries the banner forward at the top of the ticket.
Senator Heitkamp, this is a major curveball for the Democratic Party with just months to go into the election. How consequential is this? And we know the president was also under so much pressure to make this decision and to make it quickly because of that timing.
Well, I think, obviously this is unprecedented, this close to a primary. However, it's energizing. And I think people have been afraid of kind of chaos or disruption. But I think when you look at it and you have a chance to put someone like Kamala Harris right next to the former president, the choice couldn't be more stark. Now, she's going to have to, if she's the party nominee, make the case for why she should be given 4 years. But it totally changes the tenor and the kind of look of this election. Having someone younger, I think, will be incredibly important to energizing youth vote, energizing traditional Democratic interest groups that are in that column. And I think this is, I mean, as much as I love President Biden, I think this is a good day for the Democratic Party.
You call it a good day for the Democratic Party. One more question to you, Senator Heitkamp. We heard the president saying that he was firm in this decision, and this decision was his alone to make at this point. You've been in politics for a while. You know President Biden well. What do you think went behind this decision that ultimately got him to this point?
I think he said all along that if, he believed there was a path forward for him to win. I think that the assassination attempt, and as you heard Rick talk about the bounce that the former president is getting out of this campaign or out of their convention, I think it seemed clear to this president, President Biden, that it was very, very difficult to see a path forward. And he has great friends down ballot, whether it's Sherrod Brown or Bob Casey. And he didn't want to be the person who would in any way stand in their way of getting reelected. And so I think this is a sacrifice that he is making for his former colleagues in the Senate. I think it's a sacrifice he's making for the country. He has served this country so ably and for so long. It can't have been easy, but I think for him and for the party, it's the right decision.
Senator Heitkamp, stay with us. I want to go back to our chief Washington correspondent, John Carl. And John, on the Sunday shows, on the cables this morning, we heard from a number of Republicans who were saying that they would challenge in court the change of a Democratic nominee. What more are you learning about that?
Well, you have two things that you're going to have now in terms of blowback from the Republicans. First, the Republicans, I mean, and you heard this even at the Republican convention. You heard this from Chris LaCivita, who obviously is helping to run the Trump campaign, saying that this would be anti-democratic. This would be in defiance of democracy. The idea he's won the primary, he's won 14 million votes, and now the Democrats are going to, if they try to switch him out, we will challenge that. Those voters had a right. So, whether those legal challenges will succeed, highly uncertain. But they will go and they will try to do this in state after state to try to keep the new Democratic nominee, whether it's Kamala Harris or whoever it is, off the ballot, saying that it was Joe Biden's name that should be on the ballot because it was Joe Biden that won those primaries. But the other thing you're going to see happening, and you're already seeing happening, is Republicans are going to come out and they're going to say, Joe Biden is saying that he is unable to campaign, to go forward with a presidential campaign. How can he go forward with being president of the United States? And you are seeing the demands already from Republicans that he resign as president. Because how can you continue as the commander-in-chief if you are, this is the argument, how can you continue as commander-in-chief if you can't continue as a candidate? Now, Biden has made it very clear in his letter announcing he wasn't going to be running again, that he fully intends to complete his term and concentrate on all the work that he has to do as president. He's simply getting out as the candidate, but this is going to be something that is absolutely going to be used by Republicans. And by the way, I'll add one other, Rachel, and you've heard this as well. If Kamala Harris is the nominee, and with Biden's endorsement, it sure seems like she will be the nominee for president, you will hear the argument that is made, well, why didn't you tell us how much the president had declined? They will portray her as part of essentially a cover-up of the president's declining mental acuity and how age had taken its toll. So we've entered an entirely new phase of this campaign. I would say it feels like an entirely new phase of American politics. It's a whole new game, and things are going to be happening very quickly over the next few days.
Yeah, they have to happen very quickly because there's just only so much time until the election. The nation was preparing for this rematch between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. We're now learning today that is not going to happen. John Carl, stay with us. We will come back to you. I want to go now to ABC's Martha Raddatz. Martha, you've been working the phones. You've been on the phones with senior administration officials. What more are you learning about how the president came to this decision?
Rachel, I am told by a senior administration official that the last couple of days had really taken a toll on President Biden. They said he feels less and less energy, that he still does not feel that he has intellectually diminished, but is much more tired, and came to the conclusion the campaign that he would have to run would tax him enormously. I am told he told Kamala Harris just before making that announcement, and that in spite of the fact he endorsed Kamala Harris, there were people around him thinking that Kamala Harris would be stronger coming out of kind of a mini convention. But they believe this now will help with enthusiasm in the party, put the news back on the Democrats instead of Joe Biden's health. Of course, I interviewed this morning on This Week Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia. He is now an independent but caucuses with the Democrats. I put that very question to him because he said it's time to pass the torch right off the bat in the program, saying that he thought President Biden should drop out. But I did ask him if he had seen a personal mental decline. He said, oh, I think he still has the ability. I said, but you don't want him to be the candidate, but you think he's fine being president. And he said, I think basically he can finish this job that he started and finish the way he wants to lead. So he felt strongly that the president should continue in office, but still felt he had declined enough that he should not run for president again.
Martha, you mentioned that you were on This Week just hours ago with Senator Joe Manchin, an independent, a former Democrat. He called on the president to step aside, one of 40 Democratic lawmakers that have since called on President Biden to step aside, calls that he's obviously heeding now. Did you get the sense from any of the Democrats that you have been talking to that they want to see Vice President Kamala Harris step into this position, or are we going to start to see more friction in the Democratic Party?
I think you'll see some friction, but on the other hand, this is a party that wants to unite, and at the same time, as the senior official said to me, have enthusiasm in any sort of way they possibly can. So I think they'll still, I mean, this isn't decided, this just happened. I think the timing surprised people that it came so quickly. I think most people thought they wanted him back on the trail, and then maybe he decides, or at least come out of the COVID isolation.
Martha, thank you. I want to move now to ABC's editorial producer, John Santucci. John, on the other end of this, you have former President Donald Trump's campaign. The former president is just after surviving this attempted assassination on his been back out on the campaign trail. And the Trump campaign has been notably a little bit more quiet on President Biden following this debate, a sign that maybe they really wanted to see him stay on the ballot in November. What more are we learning from the Trump campaign about how they're responding to this and also how they're preparing to now face off against Vice President Kamala Harris?
Rachel, literally, as you were just introducing me, we just got a statement from former President Donald Trump. I'm going to read the entire thing, Rachel. It's posted to his Truth Social account. It reads, quote, crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, and not leaving his basement. All those around him, including the doctors and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. And now look what he's done to our country with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked, unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and a number of terrorists. He goes on to say, we will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. Trump goes on to end the statement, make America great again. Of course, the signature line, Rachel, as you know all too well. Listen, the Trump team in recent days, Rachel, you and I have been reporting this together, have actually backed off attacking President Biden because they see an easier path to beat Joe Biden. Now, all of which to say, as again, because you and I do this together, Rachel, we reported earlier today, our understanding at ABC News is that the Trump team had been building basically a just-in-case book to beat Kamala Harris. They've been doing research, some polling, and we know from our reporting, Rachel, that they've already looked at how they would, take some of the past statements of the vice president, now that, of course, Joe Biden's endorsed her, and start to build attack ads against her. The reality is that this is going to be a bit of uncharted waters for the Trump team because, again, for much of the last 3 years, they've been gearing up for Joe Biden. So it is going to have to be a quick pivot. They are going to have to start to spend more money, especially on ads, which, as you well know, Rachel, a big bulk of Donald Trump's campaign cash has been used really for his legal bills over the last year as he fended off the cases in New York, the federal cases by Special Counsel Jack Smith and the investigations brought by Fulton County District Attorney Bonnie Willis in the efforts to turn the election there. I do think the other thing that I'm hearing from my sources, and I know my colleague Catherine Folders and you were hearing it as well, Rachel, is that one of the things they're going to do is attack Kamala Harris on immigration. But seriously, though, this is a big shock to them as well.
John Santucci, thank you. I want to go right to Rick Klein now because the Democratic National Convention is also now just weeks away. We're just coming off with a Republican National Convention. Rick, break this down for us. What exactly does this mean? What process happens going forward? What does this mean for the Democratic National Convention?
We haven't had a convention that went to more than one ballot since 1952. A truly open convention does not appear likely at this moment because no one has announced his or her candidacy, including, I should say, Vice President Harris. But if more than one candidate announces, keep in mind, all that matters now are the delegates that have already been chosen. There are some 4,700 delegates to the Democratic Convention, individuals, men and women across the country that have been selected. Almost all of them were bound to Joe Biden. They are now free to do whatever they want when they get to Chicago. It looks the likeliest thing at this hour would be that they follow what Biden is telling them to do in supporting Vice President Harris. But all bets are truly off. We haven't had anything like this, and nothing like this happened this close to a convention. This is truly uncharted territory. Even the rules around this are incredibly vague. In fact, the Democratic National Committee was having a meeting to talk about how to conduct its roll call vote. While this was going on, members were actually blindsided by this news. Nobody knew this was happening, including the top leaders, I'm told, of the Democratic National Committee, who were trying to figure out exactly how to conduct the rules to get Joe Biden the nomination. So this scrambles everything. The spotlight will be on a number of other prominent Democrats to find out if they're interested in launching a candidacy and what that would look like. But right now, we're some 28 days or so away from gathering in Chicago, and it looks like there's a lot of uncertainty ahead for the Democratic Party as they find a new path forward without President Biden atop the ticket.
Yeah, Rick, I want to ask a follow-up to you, but if you're just joining us right now, we do have this breaking news that has just come in. President Biden has decided to step aside from being the Democratic nominee in this race. It was done by a letter that was posted on his social media account and to his X account, formerly known as Twitter. The president then following up saying that he does endorse his own vice president, Kamala Harris, a senior official telling our own Martha Raddatz that Biden informed his vice president, Kamala Harris, about his decision just before the announcement. You know, Rick, as we look back at the last couple of weeks and as history looks back on this moment, so much is going to be said about that debate. It was a debate that was held earlier than it has been in previous election cycles. And ultimately, it was this debate that ultimately fed into this sort of domino effect of what we're seeing now, where you ultimately had 40 Democrats calling on the president to step aside.
Yeah, it may go down as a pivot point in American political history because what it did was expose to members of Congress, Democratic elected officials, and ultimately voters across the country what Joe Biden was experiencing in real time, what he was like on a live stage. And whether it's a sign of something more serious or just, as he said, a bad night, it had so many people that are just watching at home, up through members of Congress, including people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, just simply uncomfortable with what that represented. And many, if not most, gave Joe Biden a chance to recover. They gave him an opportunity to do interviews. They gave him an opportunity to do campaign events. They gave him an opportunity to lobby members of Congress individually to make the case that he was ready for this. But ultimately, at age 81, he was not able to convince that group of individuals. And because we're past the primaries, because we're past the point where voters have a say in who the Democratic nominee is, it goes to elected officials, it goes to party leaders, it goes to delegates. So they had, at this moment, an outsized importance. And remember, Rachel, Joe Biden is a creature of the very institutions that then mobilized against him. He was a senator for almost half a century before he became vice president. This is a long, long history that he had. He knows the men and women that were calling for him to step aside, either publicly or privately, and that had to hurt. That had to be taken seriously. And then add to all of that the COVID diagnosis that kept him out of public view for the last couple of days. Almost no one outside the very inner circle and members of his family had direct contact with Joe Biden in the last few days as he watched this develop. I'm told he was watching the news, but taking inputs, including polling inputs, and ultimately leading to this decision that shocked and surprised even people very close to him, members of the White House staff, people that work for President Biden and Vice President Harris. Some of them were among those who found out when he posted it on X. It happened all that quickly this afternoon, and all that quickly in the 3.5 weeks since that debate.
Rick, thank you. And we do have reaction coming in from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who says that Biden again put his country, his party, and our future first. We heard and we talked about with ABC's John Carl about the extraordinary pressure that President Biden was under to step aside, even hearing it from someone as high up as Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. I want to move now to ABC's Selena Wang, who is traveling with President Biden in Rehoboth, Delaware. Selena, tell us what more you're learning and how this all came together. I'm hearing you may have word from Ron Klain.
Yeah, Rachel, I mean, you can only imagine how all of this is playing out for President Biden. He had to get off the campaign trail. He is isolated here in COVID. He had been trying before that point to do everything he could to prove to the American people, to prove to these Democratic lawmakers in Congress that he has the stamina to stay in this race. Then all of that came to a halt. And right when that came to a halt, you had mounting concerns. You had mounting data showing that things were not moving in the right direction. Now, President Biden is a stubborn person. I've spoken to many of his aides who say that for any regular decision, he wants a lot of data, he wants a lot of information. So you can only imagine how much thinking and rumination it took for him to get to this point. And I want to read something that's very telling. This is a tweet from Ron Klain. He's a former White House chief of staff. He's also a close Biden advisor. And this gives you a window into the thinking of his inner circle. Quote, now that the donors and electeds have pushed out the only candidate who has ever beaten Trump, it's time to end the political fantasy games and unite behind the only veteran of a national campaign, our outstanding VP Kamala Harris. Let's get real and win in November. Now, what I really want to point out there is the quote, pushed out. And that is something, that sentiment is something I've been hearing from a lot of my sources in recent days, which is they feel this is a coordinated campaign from donors, the Democratic elite, who believe that President Biden does not have what it takes. But as of last night, top campaign officials were telling me they still believe there was a path forward because they thought there was a divide between what the Democratic elite believed, what this donor class believed, and what they felt people on the ground believed. But of course, that data, that polling only mounting, so President Biden obviously came to this decision after seeing a lot of data. But I do want to point out one more thing, which is how this is going to resonate with voters. I've been talking to a lot of them in battleground states as I've been traveling with the president. And for some of them who have turned away from President Biden because of some of their policies, they tell me that a Harris at the top of the ticket wouldn't change their mind because they see them as part of the same administration. In particular, that is their view when it comes to those who are frustrated over the president's policy towards Israel and the war in Gaza. They hold Harris to the exact same account as President Biden.
Selena, thank you. I want to go back to our chief Washington correspondent, John Carl. And John, we were doing some reporting earlier today, and I was told by sources in the Trump campaign that they were preparing for all sorts of scenarios, including for a scenario that President Biden would step aside, that next step would be Vice President Kamala Harris. And they were already starting to build these opposition research books about who her potential running mate could be. Do we have any idea at this point? There are definitely a lot of Democrats with presidential ambitions on who could possibly be on that short list.
As you can imagine, Rachel, I've been talking for, now a couple of weeks about, to Democrats about this very scenario, including, who would likely be Kamala Harris's running mate. And a few names came up over and over again. One name I would put right near the top of the list to write down is Roy Cooper. He is the Democratic governor of North Carolina. He is a Democrat who has managed to get elected in a state that is a battleground state that leans Republican, and a state that Democrats think they have a real chance of winning this year. They did not win last time. They did not win the last two times. North Carolina's been pretty reliably Republican in presidential races, but they believe they came within just over 1% of winning it last time. They think that they have a chance this time. So Roy Cooper is a name I would put right near the top of your list. Another Democratic governor, Andy Beshear of Kentucky, once again, a moderate a Democrat who has managed to win in a state that is, in the case of Kentucky, really dominated by Republicans. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, I would put high on that list. And some of the names that you've seen as potential replacements for Biden would now fit into this category as well. Gretchen Whitmer, Wes Moore of governor of Maryland. These are some of the names that have been circulating, and I think will all be seriously considered by Kamala Harris as she makes, in very short order, will need to make a decision about her running mate.
Yeah, and John, let's just talk about the timing here, because this is not a decision that she's going to have weeks or months potentially to make. She's going to have to make this decision fairly quickly, because we are so close to the election and so close to the convention.
Yeah, and the convention is in the middle of August. The Democrats have established a virtual roll call. Now, they can always change this, but they were to formalize their nominees on August 1st. But remember, Rachel, you know this because you've tracked this before. In the last cycle, the process of picking a vice president isn't just, who should I pick? That's a good person. It's an intensive vetting. There are, potential running mates go through the ringer as a law firm is hired. They go and they basically investigate themselves to find out what could be used, if there's anything in a potential running mate's background that could come out over the course of a campaign that could be detrimental. So there's very little time to do vetting here. And there's very little time to decide anyway, but to do the decision plus the vetting, Kamala Harris has to be thinking about this right now. And my hunch is, even though she didn't get that call from President Biden until just a short while ago that he was opting out of the race, my hunch is she's already been thinking about this.
John Karl, thank you. I want to go back to our ABC's Martha Raddatz. Martha, you have known President Biden for a very long time. You did that debate with him back in 2012. There's been so many Democrats that have come out and said that he is not essentially the same person. We even heard from Congressman Seth Moulton, who said that President Biden didn't even recognize him when he saw him just a few weeks ago. And so much of the conversation will be on that point. Is this the same Joe Biden that was here a year ago, 2 years ago?
I would have to say no. I mean, based on what we have seen and seeing him on the campaign trail in 2012 during that debate with Paul Ryan, when it was vice presidential debate, obviously, he was sharp and funny and knew the issues inside and out and really dominated the debate. Over the years, things have really, really changed. And in this last year, you can see it. Everyone has. Joe Biden says, "Look at me, I will prove this." But he really isn't the same person. Now, everybody ages differently. There's no question about that. But he has clearly struggled. And Rachel, I think one of the moments truly that really was shocking after the debate is when the COVID announcement was made. We watched him go up those stairs to Air Force One. He had a great deal of trouble very slowly, very timidly going up those stairs. And that was after he had been out on the campaign trail. They really wanted to get him back on the campaign trail. He wanted to go on the campaign trail. But every appearance he made since that debate, people were watching, people were judging every word, every hesitation. And again, when he walked up those stairs that night, there was almost a look of defeat. And then when he landed and went to Rehoboth and walking down those stairs of Air Force One and clearly having trouble doing that as well, and certainly COVID had something to do with that, I imagine, and he was exhausted. That's all I had been told again and again, that the president was exhausted. But when they walked down those stairs, again, hesitating, and then had trouble getting into that SUV inside, it looked like he had trouble just maneuvering himself in there, took a big, deep breath. It was not the same person. I actually watched that debate recently before he debated Donald Trump last month, just to see the difference. And it was pretty stark indeed. I think I first met Joe Biden in 1988, in fact, in Massachusetts on a campaign stop. This was his dream, his entire life, to be president. And that is one of the things those who wanted him to leave kept pushing, that Mr. President, you want to leave with your legacy intact. You want to leave with going out on a high note. And that was stressed to him again and again. And I think it's something he clearly realized.
Absolutely, Martha, and even Democrats that I've been talking to kept stressing that. They said they kept stressing that to the president, to the president's team. Think about your legacy here, sir. It's not just this time in office. It's also what you did before as a senator. Martha, stay with us, and we want to come back to you. I want to go now to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, who, of course, is at the White House. She has been reporting on this for weeks now. Mary, these are extremely fast-moving developments. The president now saying that he's going to step aside. He's officially endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. We're learning that the DNC expected to hold a call later this afternoon. This has to move extremely quickly. And we're also learning that even some of the president's aides and advisors were caught off guard by this announcement.
Yeah, Rachel, just a couple hours ago, some of the president's closest allies were out on the Sunday morning talk show saying that he was all in, that he wasn't going anywhere. They were digging in. That was the message coming out of the campaign over the weekend. You know, we were told the president was looking forward to getting back out on the campaign trail later this week. So this was very much a surprise. The timing of it, especially since the president, you know, he is right now recovering from COVID. He's at home in his Delaware beach house. So we thought that this would be something that if he did make, certainly would be, you know, a couple days down the road once he was recovered. The president has said, of course, that he will be speaking about this once he is well enough to. And now all eyes are really on Kamala Harris. We still have not heard any reaction from her. She is not out on the trail today. She is here in Washington. She hasn't even announced her candidacy yet. And everyone is turning to her to see, you know, where this goes next. To imagine in just a matter of within an hour, she went from learning of this to now everyone talking about her, discussions about who will be her running mate. It is enough to make your head spin, to say the very least. I'm sure this is something, though, that Kamala Harris has thought about, especially as we have seen these conversations over the last several weeks and that growing chorus, growing louder and louder of Democrats calling for the president to step aside. But this is going to move real fast. If you think it's head spinning already, we are, you know, just weeks away from the Democratic convention. The election is right around the corner. We just saw over the last week Republicans really uniting behind Donald Trump. So this is going to be really an amazing historic sprint here to the finish, and there are just so many unanswered questions. I keep thinking in that discussion that you were just having with Martha, one of the things over the last several weeks that you saw a lot of people questioning wasn't just whether Joe Biden was up for the job, it was whether he could win. And that was really the big concern that we kept hearing over and over again in our conversations with Democrats, was whether the president could successfully take the fight to Donald Trump. And I think in many ways that was what most alarmed so many in the party when they saw that debate performance was from the president, was that he wasn't able, in their minds, to successfully articulate the argument, to successfully litigate the case against Donald Trump. That is something, of course, that Kamala Harris is very familiar with. She has been out on the campaign trail doing just that, especially on the issue of abortion, which this campaign feels will be at the center of this election that they believe will drive and motivate so many voters to the poll. Kamala Harris has been front and center on that issue. And as you mentioned earlier, she has also, of course, been doing a lot of outreach to critical voting groups, including black voters who will determine this race in many ways, Rachel.
Yeah, Mary, and let's stay with you for a second here, because as we're talking about the president stepping aside in this race, we talk about President Biden endorsing his own Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's sort of peel back what she has been focused on during this administration. You mentioned she's been the leading voice on the issue of abortion rights, but also on handling the migrant crisis as well, Mary.
Yeah, and we saw that last week, right? Republicans really, in many ways, trying to argue that a vote for Joe Biden was a vote for Kamala Harris and putting her front and center in the debate over immigration. So let's be clear here. Kamala Harris was tasked by President Biden to tackle the root causes of immigration. She was never put in charge of border security, despite the argument that you may hear from Republicans, and I suspect you're going to continue to hear from Republicans. They see that as a real political opportunity for them to try and take some hits at Kamala Harris. But she certainly has been very involved in the issue of immigration and the root causes of that. Abortion, though, is the issue that she has owned and dominated over the last year. In fact, I spent a whole day out on the trail with her several months ago where she was out just hammering this point. She has argued that Donald Trump is to blame for Roe versus Wade. They often cite how Donald Trump has bragged about appointing 3 of the Supreme Court justices who overturned that decision. And they have argued that all of these restrictions that we are seeing put in place across the country are Donald Trump's fault. That is an argument you are going to continue to hear Vice President Harris, perhaps nominee Harris, make in the future. But there are just a lot of questions here still to unpack before you can even imagine, you know, how all of this, these changes will change the actual campaign's argument. The good thing is she has been out on the trail. Look, she has been out. She's been making the case. That case will not change. But there's certainly a lot of questions about what this ticket will look like in the coming days and weeks, Rachel.
Definitely, Mary. Thank you. I want to bring back in our political director and our Washington bureau chief, Rick Klein, because Mary does make a really good point here. We've heard from President Biden, but we have yet to hear from Vice President Kamala Harris, Rick.
Technically, she hasn't even announced that she is a candidate for president, and that is a glaring omission from the discourse at this very fluid moment, Rachel. Keep in mind that up until about an hour ago, everyone in the Democratic Party was making plans to have a convention in Chicago that would do what conventions always do, which is to nominate the person who won the most delegates. Joe Biden won almost all of the delegates. Something like 97% of the delegates were Biden delegates. In fact, the Democratic National Committee was doing a Zoom call to iron out the details of what would have been a virtual roll call to lock down the nomination for him as early as the first week of August. While that call was going on, they got the news of President Biden's statement. So at that time, just getting some new reporting on this, they actually said that they'd be adjusting their guidance and trying to provide as much flexibility as possible for the delegates. You can read that in one way and say, wow, open convention, it is going to be an absolute free-for-all in Chicago. However, the fact that President Biden has already endorsed Vice President Harris speaks very loudly. Again, these are all delegates that are loyal to Biden, at least on paper. As of now, no one else has come forward and said that they're willing to challenge her. We've asked many of the offices of the people that are rumored to be thinking about running for president, people like Governor Whitmer, people like Governor Pritzker, people like Governor Beshear, Secretary Buttigieg, and none of them have indicated in any way that they would challenge, but none of them either have endorsed Kamala Harris. So at this hour, there's actually no one technically running, although I'd expect something from the Harris team in the coming minutes or hours from now. Then the question is what it looks like, because the party wants to make this look like it's not just an automatic, that it's not just a coronation, because Kamala Harris technically wasn't running for anything during the primary process. Joe Biden was. Those delegates are Biden delegates and not Harris delegates. So they're going to want to create at least the impression of an open process, all while trying to make it as clean with little messiness as possible. It is quite a balancing act. And again, Rachel, unbelievably fluid at this hour.
Rick Klein, thank you. I want to bring in our ABC political contributor, Donna Brazil now. Donna, what is your reaction to this news? You have been talking to Democrats within the party as they have urged President Biden to step aside. What is your reaction to the president finally making this decision?
Of course, I'm saddened because I respect Joe Biden, and I was prepared, as I did in 2020, to support the Biden-Harris ticket. Joe Biden is an honorable man, as he's done throughout his entire career. He made a decision that is best for our country. So I know the Democratic Party will come together at the convention, and our ticket, which will be led by Kamala Harris, will win in November.
Donna, I want to ask you, because perhaps no one knows the rules better than you when it comes to the convention. How can this all play out? There are questions about whether or not this is going to be an open convention. How messy could this process be? What will it look like?
Well, I've always said my shorthand was Part A was Biden-Harris. Part B was Harris and her running mate. Part C would be an open convention where Harris would likely have to go and get the delegates that she has earned. Remember, these are Biden-Harris delegates, and she will have to ensure that she has the requisite number to secure the nomination. I know the vice president. I know that she would be and is the strongest candidate. She's been battle-tested, battle-scarred. She knows the job and knows the pressures of a national campaign, and that you cannot teach to anyone on the spot. She knows how to make a case and is ready to take on former President Donald Trump. And, you know, I think she can really lean into this thing about vision, the vision for the country, making sure the people who work hard can get ahead, that our basic rights are secure, and everyone, including the President of the United States, plays by the rules. So I'm looking forward to this campaign. Again, my heart is heavy for Joe Biden, who I've known for over 37 years. He has been an amazing president. He's a phenomenal man, a good man, and I'm sure after the president, you know, said his prayers, because he's a man of deep faith. And throughout this past weekend, I've just been praying that he feels better, get through COVID, as we prayed when President Trump got COVID several years ago. So I know the president is a good man, and I'm looking forward to helping in any way I can secure the nomination for Kamala Harris.
How confident are you that this would be a smooth process that plays out, though, at the convention, Donna?
Well, look, I cannot speak. I just got off a call. We just certified over 4,000 Americans to come to our convention. Yes, I'm a member of the DNC, but I'm also on the Credentials Committee, so it was my great honor today to certify. This was my first opportunity in my political career to serve on the Credentials Committee. And it comes 60 years after Fannie Lou Hamer came to Atlantic City and was begging for a seat at the table. Today, we are going to make sure that no American is turned around, that everybody who has been involved in this process, all 14 million Americans plus, will have a seat at the table in 29 days in Chicago.
Donna, let me ask you, because obviously the party was very divided on calling on the president to step aside. As of just before the president made this announcement, we heard from 40 Democrats calling on the president to step aside and drop out of this race. Do you believe that this is a party that would rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris, the vice president that the president himself has now endorsed in this race? And what is your message to those who may not think that she is the best fit?
Well, first of all, anybody who would like to step up today, tomorrow, maybe next week, I hope not too long, Kamala Harris is ready. I say that because she has been out there all throughout this year, campaigning from Michigan to Florida, just the other day to North Carolina. She was out on the West Coast. She's ready. She is ready. As I mentioned, she is battle-scarred, but she's also battle-tested. She knows the job, and she knows the pressures of a national campaign. You can't teach that. So she's going to make a case to the delegates. She's going to make the case to the American people. And she is going to ensure that the Democratic Party is ready to take on the party of Donald Trump. She can lean into the fight that we've been discussing, whether it's on making sure that America is safe and secure, to creating the kind of 21st century infrastructure that the president and Vice President Harris have been working on. This is a great opportunity for the American people to see how democracy works. The President of the United States said basically in his letter, I'm ready to pass the torch. I'm ready to see a new generation. And he did that. And I'm proud of Joe Biden for his courage and his tenacity.
Donna Brazile, thank you so much. I want to get back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. You know, Mary, so much of the concern from Democrats up on Capitol Hill was not just about President Biden's chances of winning in November. There was also a lot of concern about the impact that the president would have staying in the race, also on the House and the Senate, their ability to hang on to majority in the Senate and also possibly win the majority in the House.
Yeah, and that, we think, was likely one of the driving arguments that may have pushed him to make this decision. We know that was an argument that was made in person by Democratic leaders Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, the powerful former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, you know, coming armed with data and making that argument that if he stayed at the top of the ticket, he could be a drag on Democrats. I do think it's interesting when we talk, to pick up on what you were discussing there with Donna, you know, the next generation, right? The president is passing the torch, but who is that next generation? And Rachel, we are now hearing from several of those governors that have really been in the spotlight, many wondering if they would jump into this race or if the president were to drop out, as he is now announcing. What's interesting is that they all bear something in common, all of these statements. We have heard from Gavin Newsom in California, from Gretchen Whitmer, from Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, all of them praising President Biden. Let me read you some of this. Josh Shapiro saying the president is a patriot who served our country honorably in the Senate and as vice president, and is one of the most consequential presidents in modern history. He's gotten an incredible amount done to move our country forward, defend our democracy, and protect real freedom, saying he's proud to work by his side and grateful for his leadership. Gavin Newsom saying something, you know, very similar, describing President Biden as a leader who's fought hard for working people and delivered astonishing results for all Americans. What they aren't talking about here, and guaranteed it is very early in this discussion, is Kamala Harris and whether they would then support the vice president if she were to run for the top of the ticket. Because, of course, there's been a lot of question about whether these other governors would be interested in jumping into the race or possibly would like to be a vice presidential pick were Kamala Harris to be at the top, Rachel.
Mary, good point that you're making here, that there's a lot of mention of President Biden and praising President Biden. Not a lot of mention right now of Vice President Kamala Harris. So let's take that to our chief Washington correspondent, John Carl. John, talk about some of the challenges that Vice President Kamala Harris faces.
Yeah, I mean, look, she is the absolute prohibitive frontrunner to replace Biden on top of the ticket. The fact that she's the vice president, the fact that Joe Biden has endorsed her, absolutely. But there are doubts within the Democratic Party about how strong a candidate Harris would be, a general election candidate. So this is not a done deal. And Donna Brazile knows the party as well as anybody. She's on the rules committee for the convention. She understands how this is going to play out. But I do think it's important to point out that in those primaries, and Joe Biden got 14 million votes in those Democratic primaries, those ballots listed a single name, and that name was Joe Biden. Kamala Harris's name was not on the ballot in any of those primaries. So she goes into a convention without a single pledged delegate. Now, you know, neither do any of the names that Mary Bruce just mentioned, these governors that are mentioned as possible candidates. But this is going to have to play out. Kamala Harris is the prohibitive favorite, with some people in the party, influential voices in the party, who believe that a competitive process would actually make her a stronger candidate, and some who have a doubt about how strong she would be against President Trump. Now, the interesting dance that a lot of these governors have to play as they consider whether or not they would try to come in and challenge Kamala Harris for the nomination, many of those people are both potential candidates for president and for vice president. So you make a move to challenge Kamala Harris, that probably moves you considerably down the list of potential running mates for her. So it's going to be a very interesting dance to play out. But it is not a done deal. She's the prohibitive favorite in this, but it is not a done deal. And I think Mary raised a very important point, which is all of these statements from these big-name Democrats who could potentially be on a ticket, none of them, at least to this moment, that I've seen or that Mary's seen, has mentioned Kamala Harris.
John, let me ask you, because I've been talking to Democratic sources as we've been on the air, and there's a little bit of a mix of relief from some of them that wanted to see President Biden step aside, but also some anxiety that I'm hearing from some Democrats over on Capitol Hill about what comes next. Exactly what you're talking about here. Is the party going to unify behind one person? Is this going to be a messy process? What have you been hearing from your sources in the party?
Well, there's undoubtedly anxiety, but I think there is overwhelmingly a sense of relief. And I think that the desire for Democrats to, first of all, beat Donald Trump. I mean, they speak about Donald Trump like he is an existential threat to the country. So the desire to beat Donald Trump is first and foremost, and the desire to make sure that the party can maintain control of the Senate and win back control of the House. Those are the factors that unite Democrats. They may be divided and deeply divided on the means, but there was also an overwhelming sense that Joe Biden was going to threaten all three of those goals if he had stayed in. So there's a sense of relief. And I think that you will see an energized Democratic Party as they come around. It may be messy for the next few weeks, but as they come around, as they come around the process of getting behind their nominee, you are going to see a rejuvenated Democratic Party, an energized Democratic Party. You're going to see the money flowing in a big way, the money that had dried up because there were such strong doubts about Joe Biden. So yes, it's going to be unconventional. This is going to be a heck of a story to cover, Rachel. I know you're going to be in the middle of it. But this is a Democratic Party that's going to come back in a major rejuvenated way to fight what right now looks like an uphill battle against Donald Trump.
John, thank you. And we were just talking about the lack of Vice President Kamala Harris's name being mentioned in some of these Democratic statements. So I want to go back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, because we were just getting reaction and now from the Congressional Black Caucus, a group that has stood firmly behind President Biden. What are they saying now?
Well, based on this statement, they are now firmly going to be standing behind Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm just reading through this, so bear with me. But the Congressional Black Caucus chairman releasing the following statement, praising Joe Biden as the ultimate statesman, saying he's dedicated his entire career amid great personal sacrifice and service to the values of democracy, civility, freedom, and opportunity. He is undoubtedly one of the most accomplished presidents in American history. And he goes on to say the Congressional Black Caucus joins President Biden in fully supporting Kamala Harris as our party's nominee. She has been instrumental in delivering the accomplishments of the last 3.5 years and has led on lowering maternal mortality rates, protecting reproductive freedoms, and ensuring economic opportunities for all. Rachel, we have been discussing this. Kamala Harris has been out there on the trail, really reaching out and trying to up the campaign's outreach to those critical black voters whose support they will need if they want to win in November. Having the endorsement of the Congressional Black Caucus is a very big deal and sends a powerful message, of course, to others on the Hill to get in line.
Absolutely, Mary. We know it was black voters that propelled President Biden to the White House 4 years ago. As the attention turns now to Vice President Kamala Harris, Mary, thank you. I want to move over to our Zareen Shaw. She was one of the campaign reporters that followed Vice President Kamala Harris's campaign when she was running for president, has since been following her very closely. Zareen, as the American people are now focused in on Vice President Kamala Harris, with President Biden giving this firm endorsement to his own vice president, talk a little bit about her history, what she's been focused on, and her background.
Yeah, Rachel, I want to talk about actually the historic nature of this moment, the potential historic nature, I should say. I mean, you heard John Carl say it's not a done deal. Rick Klein said technically she's not the nominee, but it appears to be heading in that direction. She would be the first black female nominee, the first Indian American ever if she were to become the nominee. And I want to point out her book, right? I'm sure you have read her book. Page 1 starts 8 years ago with Hillary Clinton, the day that she was up against Donald Trump and the day she lost. I mean, we are going back potentially to that moment where she is taking that very spot potentially. And we know that that moment is actually what inspired her to run for president years later. You and I both covered that 2019 campaign. And the last 2 days, I've been speaking a lot to about 20 of her loyalists from that campaign, those donors, those people who committed their money, their energy, their emotional energy to that moment. They also saw her lose in that moment. But every one of the people who I spoke to the last few days feel like they would support her, of course, if she were to be the nominee. In fact, one person told me there would be a deluge of money coming in, 8 to 9 figures, he suspects. He says there's a lot of pent-up frustration, anger, and confusion, but he believes she could energize this particular moment. Another person said he's been to 10 conventions in his life. He was not planning on going to this one, but he says if Kamala Harris is the nominee, he would drop everything. He says it is all hands on deck. You are starting over. You have 4 months to get elected. So a lot of excitement from those former donors and also from her former staff. I've been speaking to them also the last few days. Look, that campaign ended in a very, very almost emotional way for them. It ended abruptly 2 months before Iowa even started. A lot of them feel like they can pick up where that campaign potentially left off and see the history that they might have wanted to see at that moment.
Yeah, undoubtedly a historic moment. Zareen, thank you. I want to go right now to our Martha Raddatz. Martha, as we're talking more about Vice President Kamala Harris and really taking a closer look at her and what she's been in charge of in this administration, we know that she's been the leading voice on abortion rights as well as handling the migrant crisis at the border. How has the administration at the White House internally and privately felt about her handling on some of these key issues?
Well, I think they were, in the beginning, wanted her out there a bit more, and especially down on the border. But I'll tell you, Rachel, in the last week, what I have been told by a senior administration official is that all of this pressure on Biden and post-debate, that they thought Kamala Harris was pitch perfect. They thought she was a supporter President Biden, never wavered from that, and yet went out there and gave the message of the Democratic Party, supported him, and yet was ready to go in if needed. I'm also, Rachel, kind of looking back on this morning and our show on This Week, and I'm looking at Congressman Ro Khanna, who I asked right after Senator Joe Manchin said it was with a heavy heart, but he wanted to see the president step aside. Ro Khanna said he still stood by the president's decision to stay in. I talked to him about the polling, saying 61% of the voters in our national poll thought he should step aside. And he said, I've seen that polling. Here's the challenge. That polling was almost the same a year and a half ago. There's no question that voters don't like the fact that Joe Biden is 81, but he said, what I have not seen is a poll showing that another candidate, other than perhaps Michelle Obama, would clearly be the choice of the Democratic electorate. I also played for him from our George Stephanopoulos' interview post-debate, the first interview with President Biden post-debate, and he said, if Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi come down and say, we're worried that if you stay in the race, we're going to lose the House and the Senate, how will you respond? And basically the president said they're not going to do that. But Ro Khanna, the congressman from California and a huge supporter of President Biden, went on to say this is the president's decision. You know, I've read all these journalists saying Biden world is saying this or he's reconsidering. There are 3 or 4 people who actually have this decision: the president, his wife, a couple of close friends, and it's his decision about what he wants to do. And I trust him. I trust his patriotism to make the right decision. So as I reread these transcripts, Rachel, I'm kind of reading between the lines of what he was thinking this morning. Surely he did not know, was not aware of the decision that would be made today because, as you know, so many people were taken by surprise.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So many of us are going back and reading things that President Biden said. I remember in that interview with our George Stephanopoulos, he also said that he wouldn't step aside unless the Lord God Almighty came down and told him to do it. So you've got to think, Martha, that some of this polling, this pressure, 40 Democrats urging him to step aside had something to do with him making this decision.
Exactly. And again, I'll just repeat here that the senior administration official said to me that the last couple of days had truly taken a toll on him, not only on his health and his decision making, but they believe he does not, even now, think he has been intellectually diminished, but his health and his energy, he could tell that the campaign would take even more of that out of him, and that it was not a campaign he could run.
Martha, stay with us. I want to go right back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, you've been tracking the reaction that has been coming in, and now we are hearing from the Clintons.
Yeah, the party heavyweights, it seems, are some of them falling in line behind this idea of endorsing Kamala Harris. We have a statement now from former President Clinton and Secretary Clinton praising President Biden. No surprise there. But the Clintons go on to say that they, excuse me 1 minute, let me get this up. They praise... Hold on, I'm challenged with my phone like so many. Here we go. They say that President Biden has capped the extraordinary career of service with a presidency that has lifted America out of an unprecedented pandemic, created millions of new jobs, rebuilt a battered economy, and he goes on and on and on. And then the Clintons say, we are honored to join the president in endorsing Vice President Harris and will do whatever we can to support her, saying now is the time to support Kamala Harris and fight with everything we've got to elect her, concluding by saying America's future depends on it. And Rachel, we are also now learning that the president reached out and spoke with Democratic leader Chuck Schumer earlier today. We are also now hearing from former Speaker Nancy Pelosi for the first time in a statement praising President Biden, saying he's a patriotic American who has always put our country first. His legacy of vision, values, and leadership makes him one of the most consequential presidents in American history. She says, with love and gratitude to President Biden for always believing in the promise of America and giving people the opportunity to reach their fulfillment. Excuse me. Nancy Pelosi, though, not mentioning Kamala Harris at all in her statement. We will have to wait and see if that changes in the coming hours. Rachel.
Mary, thank you. And I want to bring in our political director and our Washington bureau chief, Rick Klein. Rick, so much to be said about former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, because leading into this, as these discussions were playing out privately behind closed doors among Democrats, Democrats fully acknowledged that there were really only a few people that they thought could break through to President Biden. And one of those people was former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, someone who notably herself had passed the torch to the next wave of Democratic leadership, passing it on to now Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. What do you make of this statement from the former House Speaker now, and also her comments in recent days where she's been very measured?
Rachel, when the history of this fateful 24 days is told, Nancy Pelosi, I think, is going to be seen as having an even bigger effect than we even knew on Joe Biden's thinking and decision-making. At almost every step along the way since that disastrous debate happened a couple weeks ago, we saw Pelosi doing what he could to try to get Joe Biden to what she viewed as the right position. And keep in mind who Nancy Pelosi is. Nancy Pelosi is actually a couple years older than Joe Biden, been in politics not quite as long, but knows him very well from his days as a United States Senator. They worked closely when she was House Speaker, doing more than anyone else probably to enact the Obama-Biden agenda. She wasn't saying it from the perspective of some upstart that wants to get Biden out for political advantage. She was saying this from the perspective of an elder statesman who knows what it's like to be elder and knows what it's like to be going through the signs of aging and trying to urge along Joe Biden through her surrogates, through people very close to her, through very carefully crafted leaks and very carefully crafted statements along the way. She was trying to get Joe Biden to the right place because she knew that this was a decision that could only be made by one man at this stage of the cycle. And I would say there was probably only one woman who could get him there other than the family members, and that is Nancy Pelosi. And the last line of the statement, really striking to me, Rachel, God blessed America with Joe Biden's greatness and goodness. I think there's a lot in that statement, in the appeal to Biden to do this for his legacy, to do this for the country, to give Democrats the absolute best shot they have of defeating Donald Trump.
Rick, thank you. And if you're just joining us now, we've had an extraordinary amount of developments over the last hour. President Biden has announced that he is stepping aside as the Democratic nominee in this race. He did it posting a letter to social media saying that he will no longer be in this race, but that he'll continue to fulfill out his term. He also then, just moments after that, in a separate social media post, said that he would be endorsing his own Vice President, Kamala Harris. We have been tracking the reaction that has been coming in on both sides of the aisle, and I do want to go back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, we've been following these statements. You've been tracking them yourself, and now you're learning more about whether or not the president and the vice president have actually spoken.
Rachel, a source familiar tells us that, yes, in fact, the president and the vice president, Kamala Harris, have now spoken. Just imagine what this day has been like. You know, over the weekend, the message coming out of the campaign was that they were all in. Their foot was on the gas. The president adamant that he was not stepping out of this race. You even had some of his surrogates out on the Sunday talk shows this morning making that same argument. They were full steam ahead. And then I am told that this was all extremely closely held. The president, you know, only alerting campaign officials shortly before that letter went public. We don't believe the vice president got much of a heads up either. We have not heard from her, though. We still have not heard any kind of reaction from her, any reaction just to the announcement that the president is exiting this race or to the fact that he is throwing his support behind her. The fact that you are seeing other big party heavyweights coming out and backing Kamala Harris as well. She hasn't announced she's running for the top of the Democratic ticket, but certainly the party and the president and many party leaders are pushing her in that direction. So we await her response. We know she is here in Washington, D.C. She wasn't expected to be out on the trail again until Tuesday in Milwaukee. I suspect a lot of things on her schedule are now up in the air, Rachel.
Mary Bruce, following this reaction and getting that word just moments ago that Vice President Kamala Harris has in fact spoken with President Biden, also tracking the latest reaction coming in from Democrats. Mary, stay with us. Thank you. I want to bring now in Terry Moran. Terry, we heard from Republicans even on the Sunday shows earlier this morning warning that they could file these legal challenges if there was some sort of switch up on the ticket for Democrats. What do you make of that? And could there be challenges going forward?
Well, there certainly will be challenges going forward, Rachel. The Heritage Foundation, which is the parent of the Project 2025 memo that has gone out describing what a future Trump administration would look like. The Heritage Foundation has already threatened lawsuits in 3 states, swing states, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Nevada. And they point to the laws in those states, which says that the nominee shall not be replaced unless there is a death, and there are those kinds of restrictions. The problem with them, election lawyers almost unanimously say, because anybody can bring a lawsuit, but people who work in this area say, obviously, Joe Biden is not the nominee until he's officially nominated. And so withdrawing after the primaries, because what is basically a health reason, he doesn't feel he has the capacity, the physical capacity anymore to go forward, would not, these election lawyers say, qualify as a violation of state laws. Now, those state laws do have timing issues. Obviously, getting on those state ballots is going to be crucial. So Democrats, who have already prepared to do that by having this virtual roll call in early August, they prepared for that. But if Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is not essentially unanimously acclaimed as the nominee, if someone does step in or prepares to step in to challenge her, that might be a problem. Because if they have to go to their convention, which begins August 19th, they will miss the deadline for ballot access in at least Ohio. And so that could be a problem. But the basic challenge that you're hearing from Republicans, that it's too late for Biden to get out of the race because state ballot access is a problem. Election lawyers say, no, he's not the nominee. No one's the nominee until the convention says so.
Terry, a follow-up to you. How much does this have to do with the fact, I mean, I've heard from my sources within the Republican Party, even with the Trump campaign, that they wanted President Biden to stay on the ticket, that they wanted the former president to run against former President Donald Trump. How much does this have to do with the legality of all of this versus who they ultimately want to face off with in November?
Well, obviously, they looked at the polls. They liked what they saw in the polls, especially in recent days against President Biden. And yet, what they're really trying to do is just muck up as much as possible the works for Democrats as they go forward in this unprecedented situation. Look at the convention, right? The rules of the convention are pretty simple at this point. If President Biden releases his delegates, they don't have to support Kamala Harris. The only thing they have to do under Rule 13J, which you're going to hear a lot about probably, is vote their conscience. In good conscience, they must vote to support a candidate. So if there's anyone who wants to challenge Kamala Harris, there'll be these test votes on accepting those rules, and then you'd head to the floor. But as for the Republican efforts to sue their way to keep Harris off of state ballots, that's probably just an effort, to make the Democrats look disorganized. There's also been talk of impeaching President Biden on the grounds that he is now incompetent to serve if he's incompetent to run. Again, almost certainly wouldn't happen, and yet would muck up the works. So expect to see the Republicans take as much advantage of the chaos here, even though they are concerned about the redefinition of this race. Look how fast politics moves. Kamala Harris now center stage, others perhaps circling, testing the waters, calling people up. Joe Biden, after 50 years in politics, in which he reached the highest level, is now yesterday's man. And take a moment to think of how this proud man is feeling at the end of this career.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary moment, no doubt about that. Terry Moran, please stay with us. Thank you. I want to bring in now the former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, who joins us now on the phone. Mr. Christie, this news just coming in. What is your response to some of these Republicans who are saying that they want to challenge this in court, some even calling for the president to step down immediately from office?
Well, look, I think the first thing is when you look at the legal challenges, I've looked at this across the country over a number of years. And what you find that courts will generally do is if they believe that voters would be left with no choice in a particular election, they always err on the side of giving the voters a choice and allowing the voters to make the decision. And I've seen that in statewide races, and this is essentially the decision, a decision by a court in any state about whether or not all the people of their state are going to have a choice for president of the United States. So while I will not be at all surprised to see the Republican infrastructure of the Trump campaign file these lawsuits, I'm skeptical that any of them will have any success in precluding whoever the Democratic nominee is from the ballot. Remember, too, Rachel, that no one's been nominated yet by the Democrats. It's not like the nominee has withdrawn. He's not been nominated, and he wouldn't be officially nominated until the convention votes a majority of the delegates to him. So I think that's something that will help whoever winds up replacing Joe Biden in terms of any of these state challenges.
Mr. Christie, this has been an unprecedented election cycle, to say the least. You have on one end the former president of the United States who had been indicted, who is now running as a convicted felon. On the other end of this, you have Democrats now dealing with the president of the United States withdrawing from the race. We are just about 100 days out until the November election. President Biden making it clear that he endorses his own vice president, Kamala Harris. As much as we can focus on the challenges also for Democrats, Republicans also now are going to have a new challenger that they're going to be facing off with in just about 100 days. How much of a big of a challenge is that for them as well?
Yeah, Rachel, look, it fundamentally changes the race. Now, what none of us yet know is how. But clearly it fundamentally changes the race. The focus of this race right now was going to be two things. Donald Trump's legal challenges and problems, and what does that mean potentially for a second Trump term, and Joe Biden's age and declining capability. Well, point two is now out. People in the media, people in the Republican Party will attempt to continue to make Joe Biden's declining capability an issue, but he's not the candidate anymore. And so, it fundamentally changes the race. But here's the thing. We need to know who the candidate's going to be, and then we have to see how they're going to perform. And that's what's going to happen here is a reset. Folks will get a chance to look at the new candidate, if it's Vice President Harris or whoever it is. And that person is going to have to make a very, very good first impression. Because if they make a bad first impression, this race could well be over. So people are going to be watching. It's going to make the race very different and fundamentally change it. But we don't know in what direction.
Governor Christie, thank you. I want to bring in now Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Senator Heitkamp, we were talking earlier just about how unprecedented this all is, dealing with these fast-moving developments as well for your party. Some of the challenges going forward, and let me ask you just a follow-up to what I was just talking about Governor Christie about when we talk about the debate that just happened just a matter of weeks ago, that really set off the sort of chain reaction with Democrats calling on the president to step aside. There is one more debate, and Vice President Kamala Harris does commit to that should she be the Democratic nominee or whoever is in that position. That could come at a very pivotal point in this race, too.
Yeah, absolutely. But she's a good debater, and she is a very, very sharp intelligent woman. But, you know, when you look at moving forward, and what Chris was just saying is you don't win any points by trying to stop someone from getting ballot access. I don't care what the Heritage Society said. I saw polling when Maine and Colorado and Minnesota tried to keep President Trump from being on the ballot, former President Trump. And the independents and undecideds reacted very negatively to that. Plus, why would you turn your attention right now on Joe Biden? The competition is going to be someone else. The other point that I want to make, Rachel, is, and you'll hear more about this as time goes on, the FEC has rules. This money that the Biden campaign has raised was raised for this ticket. If Kamala Harris is not the nominee or on this ticket, that will change the dynamics of how the money can and should be spent. And so that's going to be another factor in the determination that the Democrats will have to make on who their candidate is.
A follow-up for you there. Explain that a little bit more. So this could have an impact even on how the money is spent going forward in this campaign for whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Yeah, the FEC has rules. If you raise money for a candidate and then the candidate is no longer the candidate, in this case, they raise money for a ticket, then something has to happen with that money, and it doesn't automatically translate to the next person who might be nominated. It would have to go to state parties, as I understand it. It could be spent other ways. But remember this, rates have been locked in for this candidate. By that, I mean ad rates. And so all of that gets upset if Kamala Harris is not the nominee. And so these are the things that will seep out in the next couple days in terms of making this decision. It's not just the DNC rules. You have to look at the rules of the FEC.
Not just the DNC rules, the rules of the FEC, also the Democratic Party as a whole, whether or not they're going to rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris as President Biden is endorsing him. There's so much to digest here on this very extraordinary day in American politics, a historic moment in this nation. I want to turn now to our executive editorial producer, John Santucci. John, for months now, you have had this rematch between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. All that now changing. How is the Trump campaign responding to this?
So the Trump campaign, we've already seen those initial statements, Rachel, of course, Donald Trump attacking Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We know from our sources that the Trump team has been building a book to take on Kamala Harris, attack her for some of her past statements, and do everything they can to tie her to Joe Biden. Now, look, the Trump team is going to have to very quickly, Rachel, take the money and pivot to attack Kamala Harris. I can tell you from my sources, MAGA Inc., that's Make America Great Again Inc., that is a super PAC aligned with Donald Trump. They've already taken, Rachel, a $5 million ad buy for next week, and they are now turning that on Kamala Harris, an ad that they have already put across social media. And that buy, Rachel, going to target states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. Now, one source high up in the super PAC told me that they're not only going to take that buy, they're going to keep expanding it to other states, and telling me, quote, there's going to be tremendous chaos within the Democratic Party, and our job now is to seize on that. The source goes on to tell me, Rachel, that the whole goal of their efforts is going to say that Kamala Harris was in on the cover-up of Joe Biden's health and start attacking her and her record, adding that our job now is to start prosecuting the case against her, Rachel.
Notable because she obviously is a former prosecutor, something that Senator Heidi Heitkamp says she'll definitely use if she ends up facing off against former President Donald Trump on the debate stage, should she actually become the Democratic nominee. John Santucci, stay with us. Thank you, John Santucci, with that reaction just coming in from the Trump campaign and how they're already preparing for the possibility that it could be Vice President Kamala Harris that former President Donald Trump faces off against in November. I want to bring now in our ABC White House correspondent, Mary Alice Parks. Mary Alice, you have been keeping your ear to the ground, talking to sources within the Democratic Party, but also hearing from delegates who have a lot of questions about how this plays out going forward.
Yeah, Rachel, I just got off the phone with one Democratic State Party chair who told me that he was not given a heads up to this news, which is obviously a big deal considering the fact everything we've been talking about for the last hour. But interesting, he did say that he was given a call from the Biden universe the minute after the news broke. The Biden team wanting to make sure that he was aware of the news, but also that he was checking in with the delegates from his state. Obviously, the conversation, the mechanics of this nomination turned to those delegates like we've been talking about. This State Party chair said said that in the conversation he's been having with his delegates from his state, I should say it's a large Democratic state, so far, all the Biden delegates telling me that they will cede to these marching orders from the president, that they will back Harris. That is their intention. Like we've been talking about on the air, like you've been talking about with all of your guests, this is a fluid situation. Anything could happen. If all of a sudden we get another name from a governor, a popular member of the Senate, actually challenging Harris, we will have to, of course, go back to these delegates. But in our initial reporting, I can tell you that so far we're hearing these Biden delegates saying that it is in their best interest to stick with the president, or to stick with Harris, because that's what the president asked them to do. I also talked to one longtime DNC leader who told me that when it comes to vetting, he really believes the party has to stick with Harris because she is the only one that has truly been vetted. You know, I asked about governors, senators, and people that are high-profile figures. Surely they have been vetted. But he insisted to me it's just not the same, that a vice president who has been on a national ticket has been vetted across the board, and that right now the Democratic Party just cannot risk a mistake here, and that even a governor, this one DNC leader sort of opined to me, even a governor could, in theory, have some skeleton in the closet that he said the party just should not take that kind of risk. One interesting thing, though, will be not only, of course, who she picks as a running mate once she announces her candidacy, but this question of superdelegates. I mean, this is getting in the weeds, but we don't know exactly if superdelegates, those elected party officials, will be able to vote on the first ballot or not. They have not formalized the rules around that virtual roll call, around any roll call. We know that those rules were set to be put in place this week. So at this stage, Rachel, we are going to be tracking every meeting that the convention staff has, that the DNC party staff has, as they have to rewrite these rules or vote on these rules with such a different sense of urgency, with such a different political landscape, Rachel.
Yeah, Mary Allison, I know you personally will be tracking that for us as well. I want to go back to our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. Jonathan, I've been thinking about some of the conversations that I was having on Capitol Hill with many senators, and there were some senators who didn't want to come out publicly and call on the president to step aside until there was sort of this plan in place on who potentially would step up and become the Democratic nominee. We've been following these movements in real time, this breaking news, the president announcing he's going to step aside. Then we saw that post on social media, the president then endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. And then it was sort of this silence from some of these statements where they were commending President Biden, but not necessarily jumping to the defense or endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris for the job. Has that changed in the span of the last few minutes?
It's starting to change, Rachel. We're starting to see statements from some key senators that are not only commending Joe Biden for taking the decision, the sacrificing his campaign to get out of a race that they believed he was going to lose, but also endorsing Kamala Harris. Let me just mention a few key ones. Tammy Baldwin, the Democratic senator from the ever so important state of Wisconsin, put out just blanket endorsement. Today, I'm proud to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris for President of the United States. And then we have the two senators from Virginia, another key state Democrats must hold if they're going to win in November. Tim Kaine, of course, who had been Hillary Clinton's running mate, saying in his statement, I'm looking forward to working with my friend Kamala Harris and a great ticket mate to keep Virginia blue. And the senior senator from the state of Virginia, Mark Warner, putting out his statement, again, praising Joe Biden, saying the nation owes Joe Biden a debt of gratitude. But when he's done with all that, he ends his statement by saying, I believe Vice President Harris has the experience, energy, and resolve to lead our nation. This November, we must defeat Donald Trump and his backwards agenda. Now, in his statement, Warner says that the decision is ultimately up to the DNC delegates, which is just a fact. But all three of those very key senators saying it's Kamala Harris. And I'll add a fourth, since you asked, Elizabeth Warren, of course, who ran herself against Joe Biden in 2020, saying that Vice President Harris is the person who was chosen by the voters to succeed Joe Biden if needed. She can unite our party, take on Donald Trump, and win in November. So you still have some notable individuals, leaders in the party, potential national figures who have not endorsed Kamala Harris or even mentioned her in their statements. But now you are starting to see a bit of a coalescing around the idea that Kamala Harris should be the one on top of the ticket now that Biden is out.
John, you were the very first one to report and break the news that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had urged President Biden to step aside. How critical will it be for these Democrats to hear from party leaders, serious voices in this party, like the Clintons, like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Jim Clyburn, even Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. These are the leaders of the party, and I believe what you will see from them is an idea that this process, which is obviously has to be expedited, needs to be orderly. There still is a view among some of those leaders you just mentioned that it's actually best for Kamala Harris, if she is to be ultimately the nominee, or for whoever it is, to have some kind of a process and it not be seen simply as a coronation, a hand and you're the one, Kamala Harris, to have some kind of a process. I would be surprised if there is a serious challenge mounted to Kamala Harris, but they have to go through this. The delegates ultimately have to vote. As we talked about earlier, Rachel, Kamala Harris doesn't have a single delegate right now. I mean, those were Biden delegates. It was Joe Biden that ran in the primaries. It was Joe Biden that got 14 million votes in the Democratic primary. Now, the point that Elizabeth Warren mentioned in her statement is Kamala Harris obviously was chosen by the delegates in 2020, and she won and was elected vice president in November of 2020, voters saying, we're voting for Biden at the top, and we're voting for Kamala Harris to replace Biden if anything should happen to him as president. That's different than, this process, which is, picking your candidate for the next 4 years, but it's an indication of the strength that she has demonstrated in a national campaign, which none of the other potential candidates we've been talking about have.
John, thank you. Important points that you're making, that she does not have a single delegate. There's still so many questions and still a lot to play out in this process. And I want to take this now back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, we were just talking to John about the importance of Democratic leaders weighing in. You reported just moments ago about the Clintons weighing in. Now you're getting word from the Obamas as well.
We are, Rachel, and this is a very lengthy statement from the office of Barack and Michelle Obama. I'm going to bear with me as I read through this in real time here. He praises his former vice president, saying Joe Biden has been one of America's most consequential presidents, as well as a dear friend and partner to me. Today, we've been reminded again that he's a patriot of the highest order. That lines up, of course, with so much of the praise that we have heard for Joe Biden and so much of the pressure that was put on him to step aside for the good of the country. The Obamas go on to mention that what they admire most about Joe Biden is his deep empathy and hard-earned resilience, his fundamental decency and belief that everyone counts. They tick through some of his many accomplishments while Biden has been in office during his first term. And they say more than that, President Biden pointed us away from the 4 years of chaos, falsehood, and division that had characterized Donald Trump's administration. Through his policies and his example, Joe has reminded us of who we are at our best, a country committed to old-fashioned values like trust and honesty, kindness and hard work, a country that believes in democracy, rule of law, and accountability. They praise his track record and everything that he has fought for throughout his life. He also says that he knows Joe Biden has never backed down from a fight, and for him to look at the political landscape and decide that he should pass the torch to a new nominee is surely one of the toughest in his life. The Obamas saying, but I know he wouldn't make this decision unless he believed it was right for America. It's a testament to Joe Biden's love of country and a historic example of a genuine public servant, once again putting the interests of the American people ahead of his own, that future generations of leaders will do well to follow. Looking ahead, the Obamas mentioned we will be navigating uncharted waters in the days ahead, but I have extraordinary confidence that the leaders of our party will be able to create a process from which an outstanding nominee emerges. I believe that Joe Biden's vision of a generous, prosperous, and united America that provides opportunity for everyone will be on full display at the Democratic Convention in August, and I expect that every single one of us are prepared to carry that message of hope and progress forward into November and beyond. The former president ending by saying, for now, Michelle and I just want to express our love and gratitude to Joe and Jill for leading us so ably during these perilous times. What you will notice most about that statement is what Barack Obama does not mention, which is Kamala Harris. For now, that was a very lengthy statement all about Joe Biden and looking ahead to the uncharted waters, as they said, that are now in front of this entire country. But the Obama not willing just now to name any names. For now, taking the moment to simply reflect on the tremendous political legacy of President Joe Biden.
And Mary Bruce reporting on that reaction in real time from former President of the United States, Barack Obama. Mary, thank you. I want to go now to our White House correspondent, Selena Wang, our senior White House correspondent who is in Delaware traveling with the president. Selena, you are learning more just about how quickly the president made this decision.
Yeah, I mean, this was so closely held that I'm told that his senior staff and his senior campaign team did not know about his decision until a minute before that letter went out. They found out at about 1:45 p.m. today, and Biden's letter came out at 1:46 p.m. today. And this source, who is part of the administration, senior administration, tells me that the message last night from the president was that things were still full steam ahead. And that's what I was hearing when I was talking to aides and campaign staff last night. They were still digging their heels in. They were still defiant. They told me that the president was upset and angry over some of his closest allies turning against him. Their message to me was that they still believed there was a path forward, though they did couch that by saying the president was listening to more of those folks who were saying that it was time to step down and pass the torch. But I do want to mention that there is now this chaos, which is the split now about where to go next, right? We've been talking about Vice President Harris, that critical endorsement from President Biden, but I've been getting a lot of messages just in the last few moments that we've been on air from donors and delegates who are clearly divided on the best way forward. What is clear is that all the folks I've been talking to are relieved that President Biden has made this decision. Some of them are very excited that he is backing Harris. They believe that this will eliminate the dogfight leading up to the convention and will keep the party unified as they try to defeat Donald Trump. But others are telling me that they want to see some sort of mini primary. They don't want to see a coronation of Vice President Harris, and they want there to be other options. One donor who is very well connected telling me that every single donor that he's been talking to just in the last hour agrees with him on that point. So we're going to continue to see this play out. And just in the moment right before you came to me on air, I did get a message from Senator Klobuchar's office and from her herself. She's saying she is backing Vice President Harris, saying, quote, I worked with her in the Senate for years and we became closer friends even when we ran against each other. So we will all be tracking how all of this continues to play out among lawmakers.
Selena Wang with that reaction just coming in as well. If you are joining us now, we're on the air because there is breaking news. President Biden has officially dropped out of the 2024 race. He did so by posting on social media. You heard there from our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang, talking about just how quickly the president of the United States made this decision. It caught many of his aides, some of his close advisors, many Democrats on Capitol Hill off guard. We've been walking through the latest developments of the president now exiting this race, just about 100 days to go until the November election. We also know at this hour that President Biden has now endorsed his own Vice President, Kamala Harris. We have yet to hear from the Vice President herself. John Carl has been making the point on our air that she doesn't even have a single delegate yet. There are so many questions about just how this process is going to play out. But we have heard from a number of Democratic senators who are throwing their weight behind Vice President Kamala Harris. As we know, we are just a few weeks out from the Democratic National Convention, and the election is coming very close. I want to turn now to a historian, Mark Updegrove, who joins us now. Mark, I want to talk to you just about the historical significance, the weight of this moment. We were already heading into this pivotal election year where you had this rematch between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. But now, with just over 100 days to go until the election, President Biden making this decision to exit the race.
Yeah, another reflection of the unprecedented events that we see rolling out this year, Rachel. And I think it reminds me of 1968, the last time we had an incumbent president who was eligible for re-election opt not to seek or accept his party's nomination. That was Lyndon Johnson in 1968. But there are so many other parallels there as well. Political violence. That year we saw the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. We've seen, of course, this year the assassination attempt on President Trump's life. We saw divisions and discord and volatility in 1968. We're seeing that again this year, but truly another reflection of the unprecedented times in which we live, Rachel.
Mark, I want to ask you how history is going to look back on this debate. There was so much to be said about this debate happening so early in a presidential election cycle. Just as Americans were sort of kicking off their summers, they were tuning into this debate. Then this is when you had President Biden. He really struggled to answer critical questions, even on issues that were at the core, at the center of his campaign, including abortion rights. And then after that, we started to hear from the panic from Democrats almost immediately as the president got off of that debate stage. How will history look back on that moment in history as a turning point in American politics?
Well, I think you said it, Rachel. It was the turning point for Joe Biden. It was determinative. As much as he wouldn't want it to be, that is how voters looked at Joe Biden. And there were many questions before that debate about his acuity, about the old age affecting his performance as president. And really that debate performance reinforced it. But I think Joe Biden made the right decision for history, for his country, for his legacy. He has talked many times about the central cause of his presidency being the preservation and the strengthening of democracy. We saw that in his statement earlier today. The last of the accomplishments that he enumerated in his statement was, we've protected and preserved our democracy. That will be how we remember Joe Biden, partly because he staved off the challenge by President Trump in 2020. He jeopardized that pillar of his legacy by continuing to be in the race, Rachel. So in giving this off to another candidate, there's a better chance of a democracy in the eyes of Joe Biden being preserved and strengthened with another candidate going forward.
Mark, one more question I want to ask you, because when I talk to those who are close to the president, one word they mention is legacy. And so much of the push from Democrats on Capitol Hill to get him to step aside in this moment at this time was to preserve his legacy. Obviously, not just his time serving as president of the United States in the White House. President Biden also spent 36 years in the Senate. He obviously was also former President Barack Obama's vice president. I think there are two sides to this coin, of course, because now you have the president stepping aside. That does allow him to pass the torch in this way, but this is also happening so close to the election. What will the impact of this decision at this time be on his legacy?
It's so hard to say, but I think that history will reflect that Joe Biden has done the right thing for his country and for his party. He got into this race after Charlottesville, after I think President Trump refused to condemn the actions of those who were clearly racist and anti-Semitic. And he wanted to ensure that our democracy was preserved. He's done an admirable job of doing this, returning us to democratic norms and traditions, reviving NATO around the liberation of Ukraine from Russian invasion. Those are extraordinarily important aspects of Joe Biden's legacy. But again, Rachel, he would put that in jeopardy if he were to remain in the race, given the poll numbers right now and how voters and members of his party are seeing Joe Biden in this moment. The candidate he was is not the candidate he is in this moment. So I think history will reflect the fact that Joe Biden stepped in, staved off a challenge from Donald Trump in 2020, preserved us to democratic norms, but now the torch is being passed to someone else who's in a better chance, a better position, rather, to stave off another threat from Donald Trump to our democracy, Rachel.
Historian Mark Updegrove, thank you so much for your analysis and your time. I want to turn now to our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran, because, Terry, there is already this shadow campaign that has started for who could possibly be Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate.
Absolutely. And President Obama, the most popular Democrat of this century, just invited people to join it by ostentatiously not offering his and Michelle Obama's endorsement for Kamala Harris. He basically says that the game is on. Now, no Democrat wants to do anything that would contribute to the Democrats losing. Winning is everything in this election, and so any Democrat who wants a future in the party, as all these potential rivals do, don't want to be a spoiler. Nevertheless, Kamala Harris has, some potential weaknesses. She is the best known of all of them, having already run on a national ticket and having a national profile, but that can run against people too. And it may with her. The polls show she's slightly more favorably viewed by the public than the president, but she also has higher negatives than the others. They're less well known. And every move that she makes now is going to be watched. And if the polls come in as they will, showing either a tight race, or if they come in with her not performing as well as people might hope, that plus Obama's essential encouragement there could start a process that would lead to people stepping forward. I think it's very difficult. As I say, it's very difficult for any Democrat to do something that would lead to a defeat for the party. The game is on. And one thing about Joe Biden, the reporting from Selena Wang and Mary Bruce, that it was really just hours ago that President Biden decided to make the decision not to run for re-election. This is something, obviously, that would have taken a great deal of soul-searching. Unlike some other politicians who sort of parade their faith, Biden does not. And he said in the debate that the Lord God himself would have to come down and tell him not to run. And being a man of prayer, as I'm sure he would have prayed on this, it seems like that a decision of conscience is what brought him to this point. But now the game may well be on. Who's going to step forward? It depends, as you say, on that the shadow race that is happening now behind the scene, and everything depends on how Kamala Harris, as a presidential candidate, once again gets introduced to the public and what the public thinks about her.
Yeah, Terry, the president told our ABC's George Stephanopoulos that it would have to be the Lord Almighty to convince him, and then he was almost in disbelief. He somewhat said that he didn't believe that the Democratic leaders would come to him and ask him to step aside. Per our reporting, including that by our ABC's John Carl, that obviously changed, and the number right before the president stepped aside and dropped out of this race was 40 Democrats. Terry, thank you. I want to go now to our political director and our Washington bureau chief, Rick Klein. Rick, in the president's statement today, he makes this note that he's going to withdraw from the race. He says it's the best thing to do for the party and the country. He also said that he plans to address the nation later this week. Do we know any more about what that address will look like, what he will say? And also, have we even heard yet from Vice President Kamala Harris, the person he's endorsing?
We have not heard from Vice President Harris, and we haven't heard from President Biden about anything else he plans to say. And the silence is deafening when you think about how little we've heard from Biden at all since last Wednesday. When he was diagnosed with COVID on Wednesday night, he landed after coming back from a campaign trip in Las Vegas. We remember him walking down those steps, talking briefly to cameras. That's the last thing we've seen of any public statement of any sort from President Biden. He's been in Rehoboth at his beach house, recovering from COVID, obviously consuming the news, not talking to many people either. I've talked to a lot of associates who say they had no contact. It was really very close family members and a few aides that had any contact with him at all, even as he did the business of being president. And he only told his closest aides and advisors about this just literally a minute or so before the public statement was sent out. And obviously this caught them all so off guard that they had made no plans for this additional public address. It's not clear when, where, how it will happen. I'm told it won't be today because the letter says it will be later in the week. And as for Vice President Harris, nothing from her either at this stage. I think to divine a little bit of the strategy behind this, the thing that both President Biden and Vice President Harris are trying to do is to try to make this as organic as possible. They don't want this to seem like this is ordained from on high in the Democratic Party, even though functionally they are trying to get it there with the statement from President Biden and from the Clintons and many others supporting Harris. They want this to be a choice that the delegates come to. They believe that she is the right choice, but at least gives the option or the appearance of an openness to a process that they don't want to actually happen because they don't want a mess. And again, we've seen nothing from any major candidates or potential candidates saying that they would challenge Harris or seek the presidency themselves, but neither are they. We're talking about some governors, senators, even members of the cabinet that are widely rumored to be considering something if it's a spot on the ticket. None of them are coming out and supporting Harris either. So there's some really interesting, very careful statements that are being sent out, and often what's not being said is more important.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. Very measured statements coming. We'll know you continue to track the statements coming in from Democratic leaders. And I want to turn to one of those Democratic leaders now, Congressman Joaquin Castro of Texas. Congressman, I want to ask you about this reaction that's coming in. We are seeing President Biden step out of this race. He has endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to become the next possible Democratic nominee. Do you believe that she is the best person fit to be the nominee in November?
I do, and I think she can beat Donald Trump in November. And I think you're going to see Democrats rally around her in the coming weeks ahead of the convention. And first, I want to say that Joe Biden has been a truly transformational president, and he can be so proud of the work that he did for 3.5 years, what will be 4 years of his term, on behalf of the American people. This country, it was on the brink of economic collapse. Hundreds of thousands of people had died of a pandemic, a once-in-a-century pandemic. He rescued the country from both of those things. He fought on climate change, for women's rights, appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court. This president will be recorded as one of the most consequential presidents in American history.
Congressman, we are hearing you saying that you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is the best person to be on the ticket in November. Do you get the sense that there will be some division within the Democratic Party on this?
Well, this is a Democratic Party that is a party. This is not a cult. This is not the Republican Party that is all about MAGA and Donald Trump. And so, of course, there's discussion and debate. But I think at the end of the day, and the conversations that I've had with both colleagues and with people in San Antonio who have called to talk about what happens next, both people who are elected officials and then just everyday people living in the neighborhoods in Texas have expressed confidence in the vice president. And I think that's what you're going to see leading up to the convention.
Do you believe that this was the best decision for the president to make? And there are some that may raise in the party that these conversations should have been playing out a year ago. I mean, look at the fact that we are just about over 100 days until the election. Now you have all these questions about the delegates, how the convention's going to play out, if Vice President Harris will actually be, in fact, on the ticket, who her running mate will be. That's a lot to figure out for your party in such a short amount of time. Should these conversations have happened sooner?
Well, look, I mean, we can't go back and rewrite history and change how things went down and everything. The only thing that we can do is make sure that we have the strongest campaign going forward. And I believe that Vice President Harris is the person to lead it. I think that she'll work to choose a great vice president. And there are a lot of great choices out there. And then we're going to do what we've been doing for years, which is to go knock on every door we can, contribute if we can, make every phone call we can, talk to family and friends and spread the word and get them out to vote. And that's how we're going to win in November. And we're running against a guy who is a convicted felon, who lost a civil case because he sexually assaulted a woman, who is the worst demagogue and most divisive person we've seen on a presidential stage in generations. And so as between those two people, I think most Americans will agree that Kamala Harris is the better candidate.
You certainly have a number of Democrats that are sort of breathing this sigh of relief. They wanted to see President Biden step aside, even those that publicly were not saying it yet. What are you most concerned about in the weeks to come, Congressman?
I just want to make sure that as Democrats, we can now get unified and we can make sure that the person that we're focusing on our campaign, but also that we're focused on beating Donald Trump. And, you know, I think that most Americans in the end in November will agree with us.
Congressman Castro, we so appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us as we are following these breaking developments. Thank you so much, Congressman. It is now just after 4 p.m. here in the East. We are on the air now because President Biden has decided to exit this race. He has decided to drop out of the race for president. Sources tell us that this was a decision that the president made very quickly, posting it on social media. I want to get right to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, has been tracking the reaction coming in. Mary, what more are you learning at this hour?
We are now finally hearing, Rachel, from Vice President Kamala Harris. And I want to make sure that we get to this entire statement, but I'm going to read to you first the most important part here, which may be that she says, I am honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. She is very clearly in this race. As we have seen, the president Shortly after he announced that he was exiting this race, President Biden coming out and backing Kamala Harris. We have seen others within the party falling in line behind him. There has been, this delicate balance, as John Carl and others have been saying. They want to come out and make clear that the party has a plan, but they also don't want to make it look and appear to voters that this is somehow a coronation at all, because obviously this is up to the delegates. Now back to this statement. Kamala Harris saying, on behalf of the American people, I thank Joe Biden for his extraordinary leadership as President of the United States and for his decades of service to our country. His remarkable legacy of accomplishment is unmatched in modern American history, surpassing the legacy of many presidents who have served 2 terms in office. She goes on to say that it is a profound honor to serve as his vice president, saying she is deeply grateful to him, to Dr. Biden, and to the entire Biden family. She mentions, of course, how she was friends with Beau Biden, the president's late son. That is actually how she got to know Joe Biden, was through his son. She speaks about Joe Biden as the kind of father and the kind of man that he was. She speaks about the qualities that Beau revered in him, his honesty, his integrity, his big heart, and his commitment to his faith and his family. And she describes what the president is doing here. She says, with this selfless and patriotic act, President Biden is doing what he has done throughout his life of service, putting the American people and our country above everything else. From there, she goes on to announce her intention to earn and win this nomination. She adds to that, saying, over the past year, I have traveled across the country talking with Americans about the clear choice in this momentous election. She says, and that is what I will continue to do in the days and weeks ahead. I will do everything, she says, in my power to unite the Democratic Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump. She adds, we have 107 days until Election Day. Together we will fight, and together we will win. A very clear message from Kamala Harris that she is in this race and in it to win, Rachel.
Our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, tracking the very first reaction from Vice President Kamala Harris. For those who are just joining us now, we are on the air because President Biden has decided to exit the race. There was this period of time where we were hearing from the president saying that he would step aside, and that we also heard from him saying that he was going to endorse his own Vice President Kamala Harris, but we had yet to hear from her. What Mary Bruce just reported there was the very first reaction from the Vice President of the United States, making her intentions absolutely clear that she is in this race, that she plans to run. We heard from our ABC Terry Moran about some of the shadow campaigning that's already happening when it comes to who will possibly be her running mate. I want to bring in now our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. Jonathan, your reaction to this news, Vice President Kamala Harris, no surprise here. She's making it very clear that she wants to be in this race.
And she was deliberate. She was deliberate about this. She took a beat, wrote that statement, which is, of course, not only reacting to the political earthquake of Joe Biden saying he's not running, but making it very clear, declaring she is running for president. It's probably the quickest declaration of a candidacy for president we've ever seen, but she is running. She has to erase all doubt about that. She has now significant endorsements of President Biden, former President Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, a number, small number, but a number of very key Democratic senators, and making it clear she expects that there will be a process. I mean, the delegates have to vote. Whether anybody stands up to run against her, that remains to be seen, but Kamala Harris is as close to being the presumptive Democratic nominee as you can be without actually having a single actual delegate in your column.
And John, let me ask you to that point, how likely is it that we will see someone try to challenge her for the Democratic nomination, given the tight period of time that we have until the actual election?
I think that some of the big names that we have been discussing, emerging national leaders in the party who would have been likely if this had happened a year ago to take on a full primary challenge against Kamala Harris are less likely, unlikely to make that move because they see that she's the prohibitive favorite. You know, people like Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan or Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Andy Beshear of Kentucky. As we noted, they all put out statements thanking Joe Biden for making the decision he did, paying tribute to him, and not mentioning Kamala Harris. But for any one of them to take a step forward right now to run against Kamala Harris would be a very big move. It would be entering in as a real underdog and risking alienating the person that within a couple of weeks' time may well be and is likely to be the Democratic nominee. So I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody gets in, but I don't think that the major contenders that we had been thinking about, for a long time and looking at the possibility that Biden would get out, we'll get into this. I think this is really Harris's nomination to lose and unlikely to face any significant opposition.
John, thank you. I want to bring in now our White House correspondent, Mary Alice Parks. Mary Alice, you've been doing a lot of reporting on the convention and also the virtual roll call. And there was so much back and forth in the days prior to the president dropping out of this race, where you had some Democrats that really wanted to push this back. They wanted to delay it. You had others that wanted to move forward with it. Bring us up to speed on where this stands now.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Rachel. Instead of a traditional plan where delegates all gathered together in a convention hall would go state by state in person and announce that their delegates were voting as was made clear from their primary results, that traditional roll call we can all picture, sort of that celebratory moment where delegates are all together. Democrats had planned and still today are planning, as far as we know, on a virtual roll call where basically ahead of the convention, the delegates would take this out of the way. They would formally nominate Biden through basically a big Zoom call where the state delegates, where the state sort of party chairs and the delegates would cast their delegates and cast their votes so that the convention was just a rubber stamp, just a formality. This was controversial, to say the least. It was a plan put in place because of an original concern around a ballot access deadline in Ohio. People in Ohio said that that was sort of overblown, that it had been fixed, but nonetheless, we know the party was going forward with this plan to basically get the nomination done before the convention. And then in the last few weeks, when we had so much concern in the Democratic Party, especially on Capitol Hill, so many members of Congress that were really hoping for what we saw today. They were hoping that the president would step aside and step out of this race. They began to really push back on this plan and definitely wanted to make sure that the virtual roll call would not happen any sooner than right before the convention. And so you're right, we saw these letters circulated on Capitol Hill where Democrats said to the party, you cannot move this up. We believe we still can push the president out of this race, essentially. And they did not want delegates casting any votes until the last possible moment. They wanted to see if, frankly, the president would come around to this decision that he made today. And what we know right now is that nothing is set in stone. I've been asking staff members at the party, at the convention, at multiple levels of the party, what the process will be going forward. And what I'm told is that, frankly, it is all still up in the air. We know that the Rules Committee with the party is set to meet this week to finalize the plan, and that most likely they will still hold this virtual roll call. At least that has been the assumption that all these staff members are working under. It will fall the first week of August and the days right up to the sort of in-person convention there in Chicago. But if there is a challenge to the vice president, if all of a sudden we do start to see a real primary, Rachel, I could see more pressure put on the DNC to scrap these plans altogether, to let this play out in person, again, to have more time for the party to debate any possible primary, to vet any possible options, to have delegates consider a real contested primary here. Because like you've been talking about with Mary Bruce and with John Carl, there are members in the party who do think it'll be a mistake if it looks like a coronation. There's so many, especially in the progressive wing of the party, that have deep skepticism of the DNC, of the Democratic Party, of people they think have too long sort of kept voters from being a part of the process. And so if it looks like there isn't any process now, will that actually hurt in unifying the party? But so far, we know that they are still planning on that virtual roll call, but we are tracking all of it, Rachel.
Mary Alice Parks, we know that you'll continue to stay on top of it because there are just so many questions here, from the convention to what this means for the Democratic race for president. It has been whiplash for everyone, not only within the party, but also across the country. As Americans are turning on their televisions now, they're reading this news that President Biden has stepped aside in this race. I want to bring back in the former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie. Mr. Christie, I want to ask you about just how chaotic all of this could play out in the weeks and the days to come, especially as now you have the Trump campaign bracing to face off against possibly the vice president.
You know, Rachel, interestingly, I don't think it's going to be that chaotic at all. There are such practical concerns for the people who might be thinking about challenging the vice president. None of them have a national campaign organized. None of them have even one state director in any one of the 50 states. None of them have a national fundraising operation. None of them are going to be able to, in these 107 days left, really going to be able to use the financial might that they might have had if they had a year leading up to this. Kamala Harris, I think, will be able to inherit, by the law, the way I see it from the FEC, I think she'll be able to inherit the money that's in the Biden-Harris campaign right now. She's got an entire campaign structure that her team has been a part of already. Everyone else is going to have to be looking at this and saying, can I really get this nomination from the sitting vice president endorsed by the sitting president in the span of essentially 20 days? And if I do, I might be the dog who caught the garbage truck, because then with something like 80-some days to go, I have to mount a national campaign against Donald Trump. So I think most of the people who would be serious candidates, I think, quite frankly, they're going to look at this and say, I hope she picks me for number 2 and move on from there. There's too many practical problems to this that part are political, part are organizational, part are financial. So I don't think there's going to be any challenge to Kamala Harris. I think what we're going to spend most of our time speculating about, Rachel, is who she's going to pick to be her running mate.
Okay. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, thank you. I want to bring in now Congressman Richie Torres. Congressman Torres, you were on the air. We've been talking to you also on Capitol Hill. We've all been following these developments and these growing calls for the president to step aside. I remember talking to you on Capitol Hill in the days after the debate, and you said that essentially the president is the only one that can make this decision. And until then, you're faced with the scenario that many Democrats do not want to be in, with having the president stay and remain on the ticket. Right now, in this moment, hearing that the president has officially exited this race, do you feel relieved?
Well, look, I am deeply grateful to President Biden. I mean, he made a selfless decision to step aside for a new generation of leadership, particularly Vice President Kamala Harris. The president's decision for me is an act of Washingtonian statesmanship. And President Biden leaves behind a legacy that's so transformative that he's on a par with FDR and LBJ. You know, he has set our country on a trajectory to transition to a clean energy economy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. He's made the largest investments in infrastructure in more than a half a century. He's had the most productively bipartisan presidency in recent memory in areas ranging from gun safety and veteran health care. So President Biden is leaving behind a historic legacy that should be cause for pride and celebration.
Do you expect that Democrats on Capitol Hill will rally around Vice President Kamala Harris? One thing, as we've been reading through these statements, we have noticed there are definitely many members of Congress that are mentioning Vice President Kamala Harris and rallying around her, but there are certainly many notable names that are not mentioning her at all.
Look, I do expect that the Democratic Party will coalesce around Vice President Kamala Harris. You know, Vice President Kamala Harris has the support of President Joe Biden. She has the support of the Congressional Black Caucus. As far as I'm concerned, it's in the interest of continuity, stability, and unity for the Democratic Party to clearly coalesce around Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. We should unify around Vice President Harris so that we can finally shift the focus where it belongs, on the critical mission of defeating Donald Trump.
And are you expecting the convention to play out, this process to be messy? Are you expecting others to challenge her? And let me ask you directly, Congressman, you're a leader in the Democratic Party. If she is the Democratic nominee, who would you want to see serve as her running mate?
Well, I will leave it to future Democratic nominee Kamala Harris to decide whom her running mate should be. I'm not going to prejudge the outcome, but there's no doubt in my mind that the Democratic Party will coalesce around Vice President Harris. She is well positioned to defeat Donald Trump. There is no issue on which Donald Trump is more vulnerable than abortion, because he gave us a Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade. And the elected official who's been the most powerful voice for reproductive freedom is Vice President Kamala Harris.
One last question to you, Congressman, because there will be many who say, why didn't the Democratic Party look at this sooner? If there were concerns about President Biden's age, about his mental fitness, why not have this conversation a year out, 18 months out? Why are we having this conversation now with just about 100 days to go, right after the heels of that very first debate? Should this conversation have happened sooner within your party?
Well, to be clear, most of us had no concerns about President Biden as a president. I mean, he's had one of the most transformative and productive presidencies in recent history. Ultimately, the decision about who should be the Democratic nominee belonged to President Biden. He had the votes of the people, and he chose out of his own volition to step aside for a new generation of leadership. And I not only respect, but I honor that decision. It is honorable when elected officials are passing the torch to a new generation.
Congressman Richie Torres of New York, thank you so much for joining us with your reaction and also the news that you are supporting Vice President Kamala Harris. I'll see you back up there on Capitol Hill. I want to turn now and bring in Senator Heidi Heitkamp once again. And Senator Heitkamp, I want to ask you, because the vice president's job in an administration is very reflective. It is the president, it's his administration. He is the one that is leading the charge on the issues. The vice president is simply there to reflect the president, to echo him, sort of getting out there and talking to the American people. Now all of that is going to change. How much of a challenge is that going to be for Harris?
I don't think it's going to be much of a challenge at all. I think her challenge is picking from so many exceptional candidates. One name that I haven't heard so far, and maybe I missed it, is Senator Mark Kelly, who I think puts Arizona in play. They have a weak Senate candidate in Arizona. Maybe Arizona comes back to a possibility of winning. I mean, I think this is exciting, and I think it's going to excite the Democratic base. Chris Christie's absolutely right. It's incredibly difficult to step in a presidential race at this point, and I think all the attention will go on that VP. But I also want to make this point, because everybody's kind of forgetting about President Biden. He loves campaigning. He loves helping people out. He is going to be traveling and probably keeping an incredibly aggressive campaign schedule. And he's going to be, embraced by the Democratic base as a hero, as somebody that we're so extraordinarily proud of. And so you're getting really three campaigners with this change. And so it's exciting times. And I think Chicago's going to be exciting. I think it's a way to get the message out. There could not be a bigger contrast when you think about Kamala Harris, if she's the eventual nominee, standing next to Donald Trump, who represents the future of this country. And campaigns for the presidency are about the future and not the past.
Well, Senator Heitkamp, let me also ask you, because the president said in his statement, he made it clear that he's going to be coming before the nation in a couple of days and making an address. What do you want to hear from President Biden now that he has exited the race? How critical and crucial will those words be from the president as he endorses his own vice president for the Democratic ticket?
I expect you're going to see a very statesman-like Joe Biden, somebody who's going to reflect on the work that he did, brag a little bit, and that's his right, but also talk about the challenges of the future and why he felt it was essential to stay in that fight and why he changed his mind and decided that it was time to pass the torch. But I think he's going to outline, particularly on foreign affairs, the very dire situation we are in this country and a movement, whether it is, think about Vance and opposing funding for Ukraine. He's going to talk, I think, a lot about foreign policy. It is his lane, and it's going to be very statesman-like, very almost Churchill-like, I think. And he's capable of delivering that kind of speech, and I look forward to hearing from him.
Senator Heitkamp, thank you. And if you were just joining us now, it has been an extraordinary moment in American history. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, has officially stepped aside. He is dropping out of the race for president. All of this comes with just about 100 days to go until the November election. It's hard to even put into words the level of unprecedented moments that we have had just in the last few weeks, from an attempted assassination on the former president of the United States to these growing calls for President Biden to step aside. I want to turn now and bring in our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang. Selena, you have been working the phones, you've been making calls, and you're learning more about just how quickly this decision came from the president, also catching some of his aides and advisors off guard.
Yeah, it is absolutely remarkable how all of this played out. I'm told that senior campaign staff and aides did not find out about the president's decision until 1 minute before it went out public. I'm also told by several sources that a top Biden advisor held a call with all of the staff this afternoon and told them that they were not wrong to believe that President Biden was in this race. The message from the president as early as last night to his staff was that he is staying in. It is full speed ahead. She said that this is a decision that the president himself only came to very, very late before the actual announcement went public. She also told the staff that now they need to put their head down, they need to stay focused, and she said they need to protect Vice President Harris. And that is where all eyes are going to be in the coming days. I am told by a senior administration official that President Biden is expected to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu this coming week, and that Vice President Harris is as well. Every move that the vice president makes, her influence on the global stage as well, any campaign stop she makes, that's where the microscope is really going to be under. And another key point as all of this is playing out, since we last spoke, Rachel, there's been a pretty significant development when it comes to the donor class. So a donor I had spoken to earlier said that so many of them were in disagreement about the best way to move forward, that a lot of them did not want to see a coronation of Vice President Harris. They wanted to see some sort of mini primary play out in a very expedited fashion. Well, now since then, you've had powerful senators and Congress people. You've also had the Congressional Black Caucus. You have had major names, including the Clintons, come out and say they are all backing Vice President Harris. Since those developments, I'm told that donors are now quickly coalescing around Vice President Harris, and we're also learning that more donors are asking about how they can pitch in, how they can give more to Vice President Harris. So you are seeing a big shift just in the last several minutes and in the last hour.
Selena, I want to ask you, because President Biden has made it clear that he wanted to have that second debate with former President Donald Trump. It's an ABC News debate that was supposed to take place just weeks before the election, coming at a very critical time. What do we know about Vice President Kamala Harris? We know that when she had that phone call with Senator J.D. Vance, they both talked about facing off on the debate stage, meeting again on the debate stage. That reality now moving away potentially if she is the Democratic nominee. Do you believe that she'll want to get on a debate stage with former President Donald Trump?
There are just so many questions at this point, but she would be a strong debater. She's a former prosecutor. This is someone who can really go after and attack people. That is what she is known for doing very well on a public fashion. So she would be a strong contender, I'm told by multiple people, against former President Donald Trump. She will know exactly where to hit him and where his sore spots are. And when it comes to the vice presidential debate, of course, now all eyes are on who would be her vice presidential pick, right? But this is probably going to be full steam ahead. I've still got to work the sources, work the phones to figure out exactly what their plan is on that debate. But Vice President Harris, I'm told, would be very strong.
Thank you, Selena. And I want to bring in now our chief Washington correspondent, John Karl. John, you're getting word and hearing reaction from Donald Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's a relatively short statement, Rachel, and it perfectly encapsulates how Republicans will deal with Kamala Harris on the assumption that she becomes the replacement at the top of the ticket. So this is J.D. Vance. I'll just give you part of it. He starts by saying that that President Biden has been the worst president of his lifetime, and Kamala Harris has been right by his side every step of the way. So that is what they'll say. Anything you could attack Joe Biden for, you can now attack Kamala Harris for. The statement goes on to accuse Kamala Harris of, quote, covering up Joe Biden's mental capacity, saddling the nation with a president who can't do the job. That's the statement. And the final line, and this is the reaction you're hearing from Republicans across the board, and now you are hearing from J.D. Vance. President Trump and I are ready to save America. Whoever's at the top of the Democratic ticket, bring it on. Make no mistake, Rachel, the Trump campaign had been preparing to run against Joe Biden. They were hoping to run against Joe Biden. They were trying to intimidate Democrats from pushing forward with this effort to replace Joe Biden by saying there would be legal challenges if there was an effort to make a change after the primaries. But they are now pivoting to a race that they expect that they will now have against Kamala Harris.
And John, we know that former President Donald Trump out on the campaign trail, while he has focused much of his attacks on President Joe Biden, he's also attacked Vice President Kamala Harris as well. If she is, in fact, the Democratic nominee, how do we expect the Trump campaign to take on Harris?
Well, they're going to make much of the fact that she was given responsibility for dealing with the problem of undocumented immigrants coming over the border. Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her. She was given the job of dealing with all the migration that was coming up from Central America. But they will portray her as the one that was in charge of the border, which, of course, is issue number one for Republicans. So that's the first thing. And then they are going to make an issue or try to make an issue of the fact that Harris had been at Joe Biden's side throughout all of this, and they'll accuse her of covering up the decline, they will say, in Joe Biden's mental capacity. And finally, they will portray her as somebody who is quite radical and on the far left. They'll basically portray her as a member of the so-called squad of the far left members of Congress. But it's not that simple. This will be an interesting campaign on this, because if you remember when Kamala Harris ran for president herself in the Democratic primary in 2020, she ran as somebody who had been the Attorney General of the state of California, the District Attorney of the city of San Francisco, somebody who had been tough on crime. And in fact, she was attacked quite viciously in some cases from the left as being somebody that took a pro-law enforcement, tough on crime approach, which was not in keeping with the progressive wing necessarily of the Democratic Party. So she's not quite the radical that they will try to make her out to be, but they will certainly do everything they can to portray her as part of what they will call the radical left of the Democratic Party.
John, thank you. I want to bring in now our senior national correspondent, Terry Moran. Terry, we were both there at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This feels a little bit like whiplash from what you and I were both experiencing on the floor, where you had a number of Republican speakers going up to the microphone, railing against President Joe Biden's agenda, also calling for sort of unity in the aftermath of that attempted assassination on former President Donald Trump. We know that the former president picking Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate sort of ushered in this sort of a new wave of Republicans. He's a lot younger. He's 39 years old. Now with President Biden endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris in this race, you also have the same sort of passing of the torch, a generation shift as well, Terry.
Absolutely, Rachel, with one big difference. Trump's not passing the torch. He is the oldest. He is now the oldest major party nominee for president in history, now that Biden has stepped out. And that is significant. Look, right after the convention, we went out on the road for a couple of days. We talked to voters in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, those three swing states. And one thing that won't surprise you or anyone who's paying attention is that the vast majority of people we talk to, confirmed Democrats, confirmed Republicans, independents, undecideds, were not happy with Trump versus Biden. They weren't happy with a rerun. They weren't happy with the candidates and the choice that they had. And now they will have a different choice. And if it's Kamala Harris, it is that generational choice you're talking to, not in the number 2 spot, but in the number 1 spot. And Americans, they've been telling pollsters this for a while, they yearn for a new kind of politics. All of a sudden, Donald Trump looks like the man from yesterday. Trumpism and the MAGA movement seem very 20-teens in some ways, and Kamala Harris has an opportunity to say this is the way forward. And she represents it generationally. She's a generation younger than Donald Trump, and there's no question that people will pay attention to that. And I think that what you sense from voters is that this was the campaign that nobody wanted. It was a rehash of 2020 and in many ways of 2016. That all seems long ago now. We're entering a different chapter in American politics, and that could help Kamala Harris because people want a different chapter.
Terry Moran, thank you. I want to bring back in now ABC's Zohreen Shah. We mentioned on the air earlier, Zohreen Shah followed Harris's campaign when she was once running for president of the United States in that very crowded Democratic primary. She was actually running against President Joe Biden, and then he ultimately brought her on to serve as his running mate, later vice president of the United States. Zohreen, you noted earlier while we were on the air the historic nature of this, that Harris could become the first black woman to head a major party presidential ticket after President Biden has stepped aside in this race. Let's talk a little bit about the history and the gravity of this moment, but also on the same side of this, Zohreen, on the other side of this, rather, you covered Harris's campaign and you saw some of the attacks that she got when it comes to sexism, also racism attacks, with people questioning her ethnicity as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so much to unpack there, Rachel. And you mentioned she could be the first black female nominee, also the first Indian American. I just got off the phone with an organizer for one of the really big Indian American political organizations in the country, and he said they raised $15 million for the Democratic Party in 2020. Their goal is to raise 50 this time around. They really feel like that community has organized and they could galvanize really behind Harris. But to your point, yeah, I mean, she was really attacked during that race. But one thing that a lot of her loyalists that I've been speaking to the last few days, a lot of her friends, a lot of her old donors who I've been speaking to point out is that the tides have really changed when it comes to one very big issue. Rachel, you remember in 2019 how often she was attacked for her previous stance when it comes to criminal justice, right? She was not seen as progressive enough, but that moment appears to have changed. The country appears to have changed when it comes to that issue, and that could potentially propel her. Democrats could potentially like that far more in this very moment. I've been speaking to a lot of her donors as well, and they say that they are incredibly motivated in this moment. They think they could raise 8 to 9 figures in 1 week. Another one says that he's been getting, his phone is blowing up. He's been getting a lot of calls from delegates and major donors in case Biden were to step down. This was yesterday. So just a lot of just excitement with especially her donors, despite a lot of those attacks that you saw in 2019.
Zohreen, thank you. You've been following Kamala Harris and her campaign and her efforts for years. Thank you so much. I want to bring back in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, you've been tracking all afternoon for us the Democratic reaction that has been pouring in following the president's announcement, and now we are hearing from another key Democrat.
Yep, powerful South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn. He had suggested that he would throw his support behind Kamala Harris, and he is now doing that. Of course, a reminder of the backstory here. It was, of course, Congressman Clyburn who saved Joe Biden's race in 2020. Biden was down after losing those early contests, and it was Jim Clyburn who came out very publicly supporting him, offering Joe Biden his endorsement, and that was the shot of life that it took to revive the Biden campaign and deliver him to the White House. We have been saying this all afternoon. It was black voters who delivered Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House, and they will need their support again in November if Kamala Harris hopes to win. And Clyburn in a statement saying that one of President Biden's first decisions as the nominee was to select a running mate that he believed possessed the values and vision necessary to continue this country's pursuit toward a more perfect union. I echo the good judgment he demonstrated in selecting Vice President Harris to lead this nation alongside him, and I am proud to follow his lead in support of her candidacy to succeed him as the Democratic Party's 2024 nominee for president. And Rachel, we know now that Kamala Harris has said she is all in on this. She is seeking the nomination. She has said she is in this to win this fight. And a sign of how quickly she is turning to this race, she is now on Twitter asking people to back her and asking for donations, well aware that fundraising, as we've been saying, is such a key part of this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mary. Mary reporting on the reaction coming in from Congressman Jim Clyburn, a very critical voice. You may remember he helped propel President Biden to the White House back in 2020. One of the key promises that President Biden made after getting that endorsement from Clyburn was to ultimately appoint a black woman to the United States Supreme Court. And that's how we have seen Ketanji Brown Jackson be confirmed to serve on the Supreme Court as well. A very critical part of the president's legacy as we continue to discuss that. You heard there from Mary this push to kind of get everyone to rally behind Vice President Kamala Harris. I want to bring back in now our political director, Rick Klein, who's also our Washington bureau chief. Rick, we are already hearing some efforts behind the scenes to get California delegates to endorse Harris.
Yeah, California is the largest state in the nation. It has the largest number of delegates. It's also Kamala Harris's home state. It's also home state to Governor Gavin Newsom, who's often talked about as someone that might run for president. And ABC News has obtained an email that was sent to all the delegates from the chairman of the state party in California, asking delegates to immediately endorse Vice President Harris. There's a feeling in the party right now that the more that they can make this happen from the delegate level, the better off they'll be. So the more delegates who come out, because they're the only voters that matter right now, they're the only constituency that truly matters in choosing the nominee. The more that are able to say affirmatively they're for Vice President Harris, it will appear to be and feel like and actually be kind of a grassroots effort to make sure that she locks it down. That statement that she put out earlier this afternoon, Rachel, making clear that she wants to earn the nomination. That means talking to these delegates. That means making that case, even though we don't know what, if anything, she's going to say publicly. She has nothing on her public schedule so far for tomorrow. She has a political event that's scheduled for Tuesday. We'll see if that stands. But they are working very fiercely behind the scenes to try to make sure that the support is there, and essentially, they won't say it in as many words, but essentially, Rachel, to scare off any other comers, to make sure that there isn't another big-name Democrat who gets in this race, because that right now is the worst nightmare of many Democrats that I've been talking to. They don't want a messy convention. They don't want a messy run-up to the convention. They don't want people to feel like their voices aren't heard, though, either, and that means that they have to be careful and have a little bit of a delicate dance in trying to get delegates on board, but without making it seem like this is a top-down, you must vote for this person effort.
Rick, thank you. I want to bring in now the senator from Delaware, Chris Coons. Senator Coons, you are a very close ally to President Biden. You are one of his very, very close friends on Capitol Hill. What is your reaction to the president making this decision, and have you spoken to the president since he announced that he will be stepping aside in this race?
Rachel, it's great to be on with you, and thank you for the chance to speak to that. Yes, the president and I spoke, and I am so grateful for his decades of leadership for our nation. I hope today that folks will take a moment and just reflect on the fact that for 50 years, Joe Biden has served the people of the United States as senator, as vice president, as president, and that he made a very difficult decision to step aside in being the nominee for our party for president in order that we could be more certain that we'll defeat Donald Trump this fall, and in order that he can keep doing the hard work that President Biden's doing for us every day. This coming week, he'll be rolling up his sleeves and diving into finishing the work of negotiating the ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza between Israel and Hamas that he took to the UN Security Council, that he got the G7 to endorse. Looking back on these last 3 weeks, he has continued to be the strong and capable leader that he's been as president. When we had 31 heads of state from every NATO ally in Washington last week, he was engaged, he was leading, he was forceful, and he was also balancing that with campaigning all over the country. This was a very hard choice, but as has always been the case with our Joe Biden, he made a choice that was in the best interest of the American people. I'm more proud of him today than I ever have, but I am proud of what he has gotten done, what President Biden and Vice President Harris have gotten done these last 3 years.
Senator Coons, you are a very close confidant to President Biden. For the American people that are watching this all play out right now, this sudden announcement from the President of the United States to withdraw from this race, to drop out with just over 100 days to go until the election, they may be remembering what the President himself said just a matter of weeks ago, that he was determined to stay in this race, that only the Lord God Almighty would convince him to drop out of it. He even cast doubt that leaders on Capitol Hill would come to him and ask him to drop out of this race. So to the American people that are watching these developments unfold and they're wondering what exactly happened, what changed in the president's mind in order to make this decision?
Rachel, I think we should leave this to the president, who's going to speak to our nation later this week, and to history. Because what matters most is not exactly how he got to this decision, but that he made a decision in the best interest of the nation, and that over the last 3.5 years, he has signed into law the most important and consequential legislation of all the time that I've been in public service. You remember, I'm sure, his inaugural address. He had inherited 3 crises: a global pandemic that took ultimately 1 million American lives, an economic crisis caused by the mishandling of that pandemic, and a democracy crisis, because just 2 weeks before his inaugural was the January 6th assault on the Capitol. He gave an optimistic, hopeful, positive, speech that day about how if we come together as a nation, there's nothing that can stop the American people. And he gave a call to the American people to work together, to see each other not as political enemies, but as fellow Americans. And then he got to work. And I got to be there as he signed into law some of the most important legislation of my lifetime, investing in manufacturing, investing in rebuilding our roads and our highways, our bridges and tunnels, caring for our veterans, addressing gun violence, investing in community mental health, tackling the climate crisis, reducing prescription drug prices. Rachel, he has an incredible record and legacy. And this latest decision is just one more part of that legacy of putting the American people first.
Another chapter in his legacy, and especially in the Senate where he served 36 years. You said that you had spoken to the president after he made this decision. Can you give us a sense of how he was feeling after he announced this to the American people?
Well, I was fairly emotional, so I don't remember much more than my telling him that I'm proud of him. I love him. I intend to keep fighting for him and his legacy, and I look forward to finishing the work that's ahead and to then working really hard to make sure that we elect the best possible candidate this fall for the American people, who I believe to be Vice President Harris. He did thank me for my loyalty, and I thanked him for his leadership. But at the end of the day, what matters is not that exchange, but that he also said, as he said in his letter to the American people released today, that he's more optimistic than he's ever been, that he thinks if we come together, there's nothing to stop America and the American people. And as someone who's been knocked down harder by life more times than anyone I know, I respect that he's always had a fighting spirit, that he's always wanted to go the next round and to do the next thing to help average Americans and to bring into the positive aspects of American life those who've been overlooked or counted out, who've been on the hard side of life. That's how he's always led, and that's how he'll continue to serve in the remainder of his time as president and as a leader of our party.
One final question to you, Senator Coons. As we now look ahead to the president endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to be the next Democratic nominee, are you expecting this to be a messy process? Are you expecting that those will be out there to challenge her to get on the ticket?
I don't think that more division in our party is what we need. And I think President Biden has made his views known and clear. And he knows better than anyone. He has spent 3.5 years working side by side with Vice President Harris day in and day out. And I deeply respect his choice. I served with the Vice President in the Senate. I've worked with her as Vice President. I deeply respect and support the President's choice. And it's my hope that our party will quickly come together.
Senator Chris Coons, we so appreciate your time. You spoke with the president after he made this decision. You are a very close confidant to President Biden. Thank you for joining us with your reaction, and look forward to seeing you back on Capitol Hill on Monday. Thank you, sir. I want to bring back in now our senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang. Selena has been traveling with the president in Delaware. She's been following the reaction that has been coming in and also learning more about just how quickly this decision was made from the president. Selena, just give us an understanding on where the president is now, how quickly he plans to return to Washington, and what the next couple of days look like.
Yeah, Rachel, well, the president is still isolating here in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. He has been recovering from COVID at his house by the beach. So you can imagine just how difficult this moment was for the president, trying to make one of the hardest decisions he's ever had to make in his very, very long political career while he was sick, isolating with COVID, and as the walls and pressure were closing in around him. But the president, he is expected to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this coming week. I've been told by national security official that that is still part of the plan, and Vice President Harris is expected to be there as well. The president still has a very busy schedule as president, and this lifts a big burden off his shoulders as everybody saw the unsustainable path that this was on. And now all eyes, of course, on the vice president, all of her movements as the role of vice president and as she is campaigning.
ABC's senior White House correspondent Selena Wang, thank you. If you are just joining us now, we are on the air because we have breaking news. This is an extraordinary moment in American history. The President of the United States, President Joe Biden, has decided to step aside and drop out of the 2024 race for president. This comes as we are just about 100 days until the November election. It comes right off of the heels of the Republican National Convention and after that attempted assassination on former President Donald Trump's life. This has been a remarkable set of few weeks in American history and American politics. And now a new chapter begins as President Biden says he is now endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. For the latest on everything that has happened today, here's our ABC's Mary Bruce.
Facing unsustainable pressure from his own party, President Joe Biden deciding to exit the race, announcing he will not seek a second term. Calls for him to step aside have been growing since his disastrous debate performance in late June. From the start, the president speaking with a raspy voice, at times stumbling and trailing off, unable to finish his thought.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Even on the issues at the heart of his campaign, like abortion rights.
I supported Roe v. Wade, which had 3 trimesters. The first time is between the woman and the doctor. Second time is between the doctor and an extreme situation. The third time is between the doctor, between the woman and the state.
The performance sparking panic within the party, raising questions about whether the 81-year-old had the stamina to beat Donald Trump and govern for another 4 years.
There was a big problem with Joe Biden's debate performance.
But the president and his team adamant this was just a one-off. In an interview with George Stephanopoulos a week later, Biden defending his performance.
You and your team have said you had a bad night, but But your friend Nancy Pelosi actually framed the question that I think is on the minds of millions of Americans. Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It was a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instincts in terms of preparing, and I had a bad night.
Many Democrats questioning if Biden had the stamina for a second term.
I have medical doctors travel me everywhere, every president does, as you know. Medical doctors, some of the best in the world, travel me everywhere I go. I have an ongoing assessment of what I'm doing. They don't hesitate to tell me if they think there's something wrong.
I know you said you have an ongoing assessment. Have you had a full neurological and cognitive evaluation?
I get a full neurological test every day. They're with me. And I've had a full physical. I had, I've been at Walter Reed for my physicals. Yes, the answer is...
I know your doctor said he consulted with a neurologist. I guess I'm asking a slightly different question. Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Biden saying only divine intervention could force him out.
You sure? Well, yeah, I'm sure. Look, if the Lord Almighty came out and said, Joe, get out of the race, I'd get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
But it wasn't enough to quell concerns. The calls from Democrats for him to step aside growing to a steady stream.
I salute President Biden. I just feel that it's time for him to step aside if we were to be able to protect what he allowed us to gain in 2020, which was a victory for democracy, but he delivered us from Trump then. He could be delivering us to Trump this year.
But the president doubling down.
You made me the nominee. No one else, not the press, not the pundits, not the insiders, not donors. You, the voters, you decided. No one else. And I'm not going anywhere.
Determined to prove his doubters wrong, Biden hitting the trail hard and facing the press.
I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started.
But despite his best efforts, the pressure growing. Soon, top Democrats, even allies and close friends, pushing him to exit the race.
I do not think he is the best person to go into this election. I think if he is our nominee, I think we lose.
One by one, party leaders Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and even the powerful former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, privately and bluntly sharing their concerns directly with the president. If he stayed at the top of the ticket, he could drag down Democrats and hurt their chances come November. The president then forced off the trail by a COVID diagnosis, reckoning with his political reality. It's the job he'd spent a lifetime working toward, more than a half a century in Washington, earning a reputation as a lawmaker with friends on both sides of the aisle. A man who led with empathy after enduring so many personal tragedies, including the loss of his first wife and their young daughter, and later his beloved son, Beau. In 2020, Biden felt an obligation to run, spurred by Trump's response to white supremacists marching through Charlottesville, Virginia.
But if we give Donald Trump 8 years in the White House, he will forever and fundamentally alter the character of this nation, who we are. And I cannot stand by and watch that happen.
Biden running as a transitional president.
Look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else. There's an entire generation of leaders you saw stand behind me. They are the future of this country.
After a hard-fought campaign, Biden beating more than 24 Democrats to become his party's nominee and quashing Trump's re-election bid.
The people of this nation have spoken. They've delivered us a clear victory, a convincing victory, a victory for we the people.
Sworn in on that inauguration day, the weight of being commander-in-chief not lost on him.
The one thing that is real, that is different, I feel comfortable with it, but is you're the last guy in the room.
Yeah.
You decide, is the decision I'm about to make, will that cause war? Will that cause conflict? The decision I'm about to make, is that going to hurt people? Is it going to help people? That's the part that is different.
On Election Day, Biden returned to his childhood home in Scranton, Pennsylvania, leaving a note on the wall, "From this house to the White House, with the grace of God." His first term marked by historic challenges, the global pandemic, historic inflation, and the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. But Biden also accomplishing major legislative successes, the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. Biden achieving record low unemployment while in office, and often touting his efforts to lower prescription drug costs and tackle student debt. In 2023, announcing he would run again, Biden asked voters for more time to get the job done.
We, you and I, together, we're turning things around, and we're doing it in a big way. It's time to finish the job. Finish the job.
But those concerns about his age persisting, the inevitable march of time, a challenge he could not overcome. The senator who came to Washington at just 29 years old, now choosing to walk away after just one term, the oldest president to ever serve, making the difficult decision to pass the torch to the next generation.
A remarkable decision, a remarkable legacy. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, the president making it absolutely clear he wants to pass this torch now to his own vice president.
He is, Rachel, the president offering his full support and endorsement for Vice President Kamala Harris to be the nominee. But the president making this remarkable, historic decision to put aside his own personal interest, saying he was doing this because he believes it is in the best interest of the country and the party. Now, we know the president has said he will speak to the American people later in the week. For now, Rachel, he is expressing his, quote, heartfelt appreciation to the American people for the faith and trust you have placed in me.
Mary
Rachel.
Bruce, thank you. Chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl, not an easy decision for President Biden, one that he really struggled with. He wanted to stay in this race.
Rachel, it's an extraordinarily difficult decision when you think that Joe Biden, who ran for Senate at age 29, and not long after he became eligible to run for president, ran for president. This is somebody who much of his adult life has dreamed of being president of the United States. He finally reached it. He absolutely wanted to run again. That's why he declared his campaign. And to be forced to basically throw that all away, it was a tough decision that came at a time when he really had no choice. He held on as long as he could possibly hold on, but he had lost virtually the entire leadership of the Democratic Party. The donors who give the money to help the party run had all urged him, pleaded with him to get out of this race because they believe that concerns about his age had just simply made it impossible for him to win, and it become such a concern, we're going to hurt Democrats up and down the ballot. They wanted him to sacrifice, make a personal sacrifice for the sake of the party and for the sake of the country. And Joe Biden finally agreed to do that and made this statement. And now you will hear tributes, but eventually you will hear questions raised about how long it took.
And I want to bring in now, John, thank you, our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent, Martha Raddatz. Martha, the final word here, an extraordinary moment in American history.
It truly is. And Joe Biden wanted so badly to stay in this race, to prove he could do it after the debate. But in the end, he knew this was a campaign that demanded energy and eloquence, and he struggled with both. Rachel?
Martha, thank you. And our coverage continues on ABC News Live and on abcnews.com. And we'll have the latest on World News Tonight with David Muir. We'll have a full wrap-up of the day's events with our special Biden Stands Down. The race for the White House at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on ABC News. I want to thank you to our extraordinary team who has been out following these developments as they've been coming in. President Biden stepping down, exiting the race. As President Biden leaves this race, he also has now endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to become the next Democratic nominee. It's been an extraordinary day of developments. We are just coming off on the heels of the Republican National Convention and that attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. Of course, we were also just about 100 days out from the November election and also just a few weeks away from the Democratic National Convention. There are so many questions here about what happens next. Will Vice President Kamala Harris face a challenge on the Democratic side? How will the convention play out? She does not have a delegate just yet, but there are still just so much more to cover in this race as we continue to follow these extraordinary developments. Our team learned earlier today that this was a decision that was made very quickly by President Biden. His aides, his closest advisors, shocked by this decision as the president officially announces that he is stepping out of this race. As I mentioned earlier, our coverage continues on ABC News and abcnews.com. Again, we'll be right back here on World News Tonight with David Muir, a full wrap-up of the events later today with our special. Good night.
This has been a special report from ABC News. The following is a paid program. The products, services, and opinions may not represent the views of WBRZ-TV.
The following program is a paid advertisement for AAA.
Who can you call when you need immediate help? Any time of day or night, even when you're hundreds of miles away from home. Always giving you and your family peace of mind, knowing that people, benefits, and services are there for you 24/7. Over 50 million members rely on AAA, America's largest motor club and most highly recommended major roadside assistance provider. A company built by members for members.
Hello, I'm Brandon Johnson. Chances are you know AAA or have heard about AAA's legendary roadside assistance. But you might be surprised at what you don't know about AAA.
I use AAA for everything. I have AAA auto insurance, AAA life insurance. I use AAA for my travel. Roadside assistance, I use AAA for discounts at hotels. So as much as I use it, it definitely pays for itself.
I can't believe we waited this long.
The membership benefits, along with the what everybody knows about the roadside assistance and the insurance, all of those, we can't say enough. Our friends are like, really? You're going to talk about AAA again? Yeah, it's fantastic. It's that good.
You know, if you have one flat tire or one battery service, towing service, if you do have a vehicle that does need to be towed, that membership fee pays for itself.
There are so many benefits to membership, and AAA is there. If you're locked out of your car, need a tow, run out of gas, have a flat tire, or a dead battery. You can even buy a new AAA battery and have it installed on the spot. All to help get you back on the road again fast. And we cover you, not just your car, whether you're the driver or passenger in any car, SUV, or pickup truck. Stay tuned to find out how you can save on your new AAA membership. All for just about $1 a week. Your membership could pay for itself the very first time you request roadside assistance. Or use your AAA discounts, making AAA an outstanding value. both on and off the road. But we're not just a motor club. You could also get great rates on insurance, and not just auto insurance. Imagine saving hundreds of dollars when you combine your auto, home, and life policies through AAA. You can get so much more than roadside assistance. Your AAA membership can also help you save every day on items you really need. As a AAA member, you can take advantage of discounts on travel, rental cars, and hotels, and get free personalized travel planning and exclusive member benefits on destinations around the world. We're one of America's most trusted companies, here for you 24/7. So join AAA and be part of a community of over 50 million people across America. What matters to you matters to us. That's why, through all of life's travels, we're always with you.
For more than 100 years, AAA has been helping motorists on the road, advocating for safer roads, safer cars, and safer drivers. I'm sure you've heard of AAA's legendary roadside assistance. You may have even used it for you or your family, at home or away. But today, we're going to show you what you may not know about AAA and all the different ways people just like you rely on AAA every day.
I was coming home from work one day. It was in the middle of summer. Put my car in the garage, and my car automatically locked. This was when our daughter was very young. She was in a car seat in the back seat. She was asleep in the car seat.
She was like 6 months old.
Yeah, I couldn't get the door open. So I just went into panic mode. I automatically called Brian as quick as I could, called AAA and let him know what was going on. They actually responded quicker than he did. They had whatever it is that they used to get the door open. They had the door open in a matter of, I mean, it was as quick as maybe a couple of minutes.
The tow truck driver, literally, when I pulled up right behind him. He was sprinting up the driveway in a full sprint.
Yes.
Like, because he saw how important it was.
Yeah,
and he,
as soon as he heard that there was a baby locked in the car, that was his first priority, and he was there, and it was awesome.
No one else can match AAA's comprehensive roadside assistance program.
Help will arrive to get you back on the road, fast. And AAA roadside assistance is available 24/7, day or night, to meet your needs with a network of more than 8,000 service providers and over 50,000 vehicles across the U.S. Ready to serve you. You can always count on AAA.
Well, I was driving my son to his football practice. The highway that I frequently take is pretty remote. We live in a small, remote town. We were driving along, and I got a flat tire. Fortunately, I was able to call AAA, changed our tire, and I was able to drive my son to practice, and we were on time, so it was great.
Yeah, and again, that's a perfect example of that peace of mind that comes from me, knowing when I'm at work that my family's taken care of, and you know, I don't have to leave work and drive and find her and go change a tire. You know, like that system's in place, and it was, you know, they took care of her.
Gives us a lot of peace of mind.
Yeah.
These days, some insurance companies and car makers provide roadside assistance plans, but do they provide the kind of service you need? When something goes wrong on the road, some insurance companies even require you to find a towing service on your own, pay up front for the help, and then file paperwork to get reimbursed at a later date, just for a simple tow or a lockout. You see, not all roadside assistance plans are the same. Some car manufacturers' plans come with various limitations, making it difficult to know what you're actually getting. Some plans are even free to join, but then charge you every time you use the service. And many plans expire after a limited period of time, so you may not even realize you're no longer covered. On the other hand, AAA offers fast, reliable roadside assistance you can trust. And when you call AAA, help will arrive to get you back on the road fast. Another AAA advantage is that while many other car manufacturers and insurance companies' roadside assistance plans only cover your car, AAA covers you, no matter what car you're in. That's right, the benefit goes with you. So whether you're a passenger in a friend's car or in a rental car, you're not left stranded, as long as you're a AAA member and you've got this. You know, AAA is always with you.
With AAA, you can have confidence that when you call, AAA will be there. Backed by 100 years of quality, reliable member service. AAA Roadside Assistance offers more than just a tow. AAA can help with a lockout, a flat tire, or a dead battery. You can even buy a new AAA battery and have it installed on the spot. All to help get you back on the road again fast.
So my car wouldn't start. I didn't know what was wrong with it. So I called AAA, and sure enough, it was my battery. And they actually will sell you one right there and then. Don't have to go to auto body shop. So that was really great and convenient, because then I was out of there within, you know, it takes no time at all to install it. So I was out of there in like 10 minutes and on time for work, hopefully.
Wherever you go, wherever you are, you can trust AAA to be there when you need them.
If something happens and we're broken down, my family's not going to be stranded.
I had an incident a couple of years ago where my car broke down in the evening, and I called AAA. They were there fast, and they got me off the freeway safely. I just don't know what I'd do without AAA.
I'm a single mom. I'm a nurse. I work 40+ hours a week. I'm raising 3 sons, and it's really good to know that when something happens, that AAA is gonna be there for me.
So our parents have always had it, so then we got it as well when we got our driver's license, you know.
Our parents felt safe knowing we had AAA.
AAA doesn't just save you money on the road. They can save you money virtually anywhere.
AAA members receive discounts at favorite retail stores, restaurants, hotels, attractions, and so much more. Who doesn't love to save? And those savings really add up. AAA members save nearly $2 billion in a year with AAA discounts. AAA also offers a mobile app that shows you exactly where to find nearby savings, whether you're close to home or traveling. Isn't it time you got your share of the savings?
Take advantage of your AAA member discounts just one time, and your membership could easily pay for itself. After that, the money you save is like putting money in your pocket. And that's just one more way that AAA is always with you.
Through the AAA app, it's basically like having the website at your fingertips without having to go through the website. You can just pull up the app, show your card, and that'll get you the discount too.
So, if you're not a AAA member already, here's your chance to enjoy all that AAA has to offer. AAA makes it easy to manage your membership. You can manage your membership online to make payments, updates to your accounts, or to access special member-only offers.
Now you get peace of mind with one of the most comprehensive and trusted roadside assistance programs in the country with a AAA membership. 24-hour help on the road is always just a phone call away. While many other plans only cover your car, AAA is the smart choice, covering you, whether you're the driver or the passenger in any car, SUV, or pickup truck. And there's AAA mobile battery service with on-scene battery testing, where you can purchase a battery and have it installed on the spot with a nationwide 3-year free replacement warranty. Our legendary roadside assistance alone makes AAA a great value. But roadside assistance is just the beginning. AAA members can buy auto and home insurance at very competitive rates. And you can get a variety of insurance discounts, which could save you hundreds of dollars. Also, did you know that AAA is a trusted provider of affordable life insurance and annuities from AAA Life Insurance Company, with a variety of policies that can meet your family's financial needs at every stage of life? AAA membership enables you to get free identity theft monitoring with Protect My ID Essential by Experian, a $49 annual value. Imagine the peace of mind you'll have knowing that Protect My ID Essential can alert you to key changes in your credit report and can help provide early detection of identity theft and fraud to minimize its impact.
So with Protect My ID, I just don't have to worry anymore. It's just another way I have peace of mind through AAA.
AAA is one of the largest leisure travel networks in North America, with the buying power of over 50 million members in the U.S. to deliver special member-only deals that you can't find anywhere else. Plus, get great online maps and turn-by-turn driving directions and traffic conditions, all free to our members, all in one place. The free Auto Club app gives you immediate access to your member benefits. Contact roadside assistance at the touch of a button and track the location of your service vehicle. Find AAA discount locations and restaurants. Book reservations for AAA Diamond designated hotels, rental cars, and more. And AAA can save you even more with incredible AAA discounts on the things you love the most, like dining and shopping. Go online, download the app, or visit your local branch to purchase discounted movie, theme park tickets, and more. Plus, you get a subscription to the AAA magazine included with your membership. This is a great time to join AAA. Call during the special television offer and you'll pay just $62 for a full year of AAA membership. And as a very special bonus, you'll get a free 1-year membership for 2 additional eligible family members. That's about $1 a week for the peace of mind of 24-hour roadside assistance, plus everything else AAA has to offer. During the special offer, the admission fee is reduced. Join AAA today, and you'll also get a $25 Visa gift card. Yours absolutely free, but act quickly. Your AAA membership can easily pay for itself the very first time you use roadside assistance or take advantage of your AAA discounts. Think of it this way. If you're not a member, just one tow could cost you over $100 with another provider. But if you enroll today, this service is covered. That's why it makes sense to join AAA. For just pennies a day, you can drive with peace of mind. Call today and join over 50 million AAA members across America. This is our guarantee. If you cancel at any time during the year, we'll give you a prorated refund of the membership dues you paid. No questions asked. Don't let this incredible offer pass you by.
Join today, and a full year of AAA membership is just $62. We'll reduce the admission fee. And as a special bonus, you'll receive a free one-year membership for 2 additional eligible family members and a $25 Visa gift card. That's a combined value of up to $159. Now only $62 through this limited time offer. That's about $1 a week for 24-hour roadside assistance when you need it. AAA discounts on dining, movie, and theme park tickets. And a $25 Visa gift card. And your roadside assistance benefit